The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Cora Delaney's hands trembled as she clutched the photograph that wasn't hers. In 3 minutes, she would face Rhett Calloway, a man expecting golden-haired beauty, not the sun-worn substitute her father shoved westward in shame. "Tell him the truth," she whispered to herself, even as terror clawed her throat. But when the door swung open and Wyoming wind hit her face, something shifted. This wasn't just deception, this was escape. One choice stood before her: confess immediately and return to invisibility, or step into a life that might finally be hers. Welcome to this tale of courage, deception, and unexpected love. Stay until the very end to see how Cora's journey unfolds, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Delaney household had always been divided into two categories: Lydia and everyone else. Cora understood this before she could even spell her own name. She learned it in the way her mother's eyes softened when Lydia entered a room, in the way her father's stern face cracked into something almost tender when his youngest daughter laughed. She learned it in the endless parade of suitors who crowded their Massachusetts parlor, their hungry gazes sliding past Cora as though she were furniture. 24 years of being the practical daughter had carved grooves into Cora's soul, deep channels where resentment pooled and festered, even as she told herself it didn't matter. She was strong, capable, the one who mucked stalls when the stable boy fell ill, who balanced the household ledgers when her father's eyesight began to fail, who nursed her mother through the pneumonia that eventually claimed her 3 winters past. Lydia was the ornament, Cora was the foundation. And foundations, as everyone knew, were meant to be buried. The morning everything changed began like any other. October dawn crept through the kitchen window as Cora kneaded bread dough, her capable hands working the rhythm she'd mastered at 14. The house still slept, even Lydia, who never rose before 9 unless absolutely necessary. Their father would be in his study already, poring over correspondence and account books, his face set in its perpetual expression of disappointment. Thomas Delaney had made his fortune in textiles, but 3 bad investments and a warehouse fire had reduced his empire to a respectable but modest income. Enough to maintain appearances, not enough to provide the dowries that might secure advantageous matches for his daughters. Not that Lydia needed a dowry. Men fell over themselves for a chance at her hand, drawn by corn silk hair and porcelain skin, by eyes the color of summer sky, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. At 22, she'd refused at least a dozen proposals, claiming each suitor too boring, too poor, too old, too something. Their father indulged her. He always had. Cora had just set the loaves to rise when she heard the study door slam open, followed by her father's heavy footsteps in the hall. She braced herself. Nothing good ever came from Thomas Delaney's anger before breakfast. "Cora!" His voice cracked like a whip. "My study, now." She wiped flour from her hands and followed, her heart already sinking. Through the study doorway, she could see Lydia perched in the leather chair, still in her dressing gown, her beautiful face blotchy with tears. Whatever had happened, Lydia was at the center of it. She always was. "Close the door," her father commanded. Cora obeyed, positioning herself near the bookshelf, a trick she'd learned young. Stay on the periphery, make yourself small, let the storm pass over you. But this time, the storm had her name on it. Thomas Delaney held up a letter, his hand shaking with fury. "Do you know what this is?" Cora shook her head. "This," he said, voice dripping venom, "is a letter from a Mr. Rhett Calloway of Powder Ridge, Wyoming Territory. A rancher of some means, by all accounts. He writes to confirm arrangements for his bride's arrival, arrangements your sister agreed to 6 months ago." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cora's gaze snapped to Lydia, who was studying her fingernails with exaggerated fascination. "Lydia has been conducting a correspondence," their father continued, each word bitten off sharp, "with this gentleman. She sent him her photograph. She accepted his proposal of marriage. She agreed to travel west as his mail-order bride. The wedding is scheduled for 2 weeks after her arrival." Cora's mouth fell open. "Lydia, you—" "I never meant to actually go through with it," Lydia burst out, her composure cracking. It was just for fun. Something exciting. He writes such interesting letters about the mountains and the cattle and—" She broke off, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never thought he'd actually expect me to come." Expect you? Their father's voice rose to a roar. You gave him your word. You signed your name to a contract, and now he writes that he's sent travel funds and arranged for your passage on the stage from Cheyenne. He slammed the letter onto his desk. Do you understand what this means? What scandal you've brought upon this family? Lydia's tears flowed faster. I won't go, she whispered. You can't make me. I won't go to that horrible wilderness and marry some rough cowboy and live in squalor. I won't. You most certainly will not, Thomas agreed, and something in his tone made Cora's stomach drop. Because you, daughter, have finally exhausted my patience. You refuse every decent man in Boston, you play games with the heart of an honest gentleman in Wyoming, and you have the audacity to claim it was for fun. He turned his cold gaze to Cora. Fortunately, we have a solution. No. The word formed in Cora's mind but wouldn't reach her lips. Cora will go in your place. The room tilted. Cora gripped the bookshelf behind her, its solid wood the only real thing in a suddenly surreal world. Father, You are 24 years old with no prospects, he said flatly. You're plain-spoken, strong, and accustomed to hard work. You'll be far more suited to ranch life than your sister ever could be. But the photograph, Cora managed. He's expecting Lydia. He thinks... Then you'll explain the situation when you arrive. Thomas waved his hand dismissively. If he's a man of any character, he'll understand that he's received the better sister, the one who won't wilt at the first sight of cattle or complain about the lack of society parties. Each word landed like a blow. The better sister, but only because she was useful, only because she could be sacrificed to clean up Lydia's mess. Lydia had stopped crying. She was watching Cora now with something that might have been guilt or might have been relief. It was always so hard to tell with her. I'll write to Mr. Calloway today, Thomas continued, returning to his desk. I'll explain that due to unforeseen circumstances, my elder daughter will be arriving in Lydia's stead. He can decide whether to proceed with the arrangement or return you home. Return her home. To what? To more years of invisibility, now with the added shame of rejection? To watching Lydia eventually marry some Boston gentleman while Cora grew old in her father's house. A cautionary tale about the price of being practical. The stage leaves in 4 days, her father said. Pack accordingly. Dismissed. Cora stood frozen, her mind spinning. Lydia rose gracefully, touching Cora's arm as she passed, a gesture that might have been gratitude or apology or simply habit. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of rosewater in her wake. Father, Cora tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, there must be another way. Thomas Delaney looked up from his ledger, and for a moment, just a fleeting, painful moment, Cora thought she saw something like pity in his eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the familiar hardness. This is your duty, he said simply. You've always understood duty, Cora. Don't fail me now. She fled the study before the tears could come. The next 3 days passed in a haze of preparation. Cora packed her sturdy dresses, none of the silks and satins that filled Lydia's wardrobe, but practical calico and wool that could withstand work and weather. She packed her mother's pearl brooch, the only piece of jewelry she owned. She packed her books, though she suspected she'd have little time for reading on a Wyoming ranch. She did not pack hope. Hope was a luxury for girls like Lydia. The letters came out on the second night. Cora found them in Lydia's room, tied with a blue ribbon and tucked into her sister's writing desk. 6 months of correspondence, from the initial tentative inquiry through the matrimonial agency to the final arrangements for travel. Cora read them by candlelight, and with each page something twisted in her chest. Rhett Calloway wrote nothing like she'd expected. His letters were thoughtful, honest, touched with dry humor and genuine loneliness. He described his ranch in the Powder River Valley, 2,000 acres of grassland and pine forest, a log house he'd built with his own hands, cattle that thrived on the rich grazing. He wrote about his neighbors, the widow Martha Boone, who ran her late husband's horse operation with an iron will, the young ranch hand Caleb Reeves, who reminded him of his younger brother killed at Gettysburg. He wrote about the war, carefully, the shadows it had left, the nightmares that still woke him some nights. He said he was looking for partnership, not decoration. He said he wanted a woman who could stand beside him, not behind him. And Lydia had treated it all as entertainment. Fury kindled in Cora's chest. Fury at her sister's carelessness, at her father's coldness, at the cosmic joke that had placed her in Lydia's shadow for 24 years. But beneath the anger lurked something more dangerous: curiosity. What would it be like to leave? To step onto a train heading west and never look back? To trade the suffocating expectations of Boston society for open sky and honest work? To be chosen, even if the choosing was based on a lie? The photograph haunted her. It sat on her nightstand those last nights, Lydia's face smiling up from the sepia-toned image with that effortless confidence beautiful girls wore like a second skin. Rhett Calloway had fallen in love, or at least in like, with that image. What would he feel when he saw Cora instead? Disappointment, obviously. Maybe anger, possibly rejection. She would tell him immediately. The moment she stepped off that stage, she would explain the deception and offer to return home. It was the only honorable course, but oh, how tempting it was to imagine otherwise. The morning of her departure arrived cold and gray, October wind stripping the last leaves from the elm trees lining their street. Cora stood in the front hall in her traveling dress, sturdy brown wool with a high collar and practical buttons, while her father reviewed last-minute instructions. You'll take the train to Chicago, then another to Cheyenne. The stage company has already been notified. From Cheyenne, it's a day's journey to Powder Ridge. He pressed a folded paper into her hands. Emergency funds? Use them sparingly. Yes, father. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You've always been the strong one, Cora. The reliable one. Do not disappoint me in this. It wasn't a blessing. It was a command. Lydia appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her dressing gown despite the early hour. She descended slowly, gracefully, and Cora had the wild thought that even in guilt, her sister was beautiful. Cora, Lydia said softly, thank you. Truly. Words jammed in Cora's throat. Accusations, pleas, years of swallowed resentment. But what would be the point? Lydia would never understand. She'd been given beauty, and with it, the luxury of never having to understand. Goodbye, Lydia, Cora said instead. The carriage waited outside, her trunk already loaded. Cora took one last look at the only home she'd ever known. The brick facade, the black shutters, the stolid respectability of it all, and felt nothing but relief. Her father handed her into the carriage without ceremony. No embrace, no words of encouragement, just the cold efficiency of a man disposing of an obligation. As the horses pulled away, Cora didn't look back. The journey west took 8 days. 8 days of trains rattling through landscapes that grew progressively wider and wilder. 8 days of way stations and cramped seats, and the constant companionship of strangers who asked too many questions. 8 days of Cora, wrestling with her conscience, rehearsing the confession she would make to Rhett Calloway. I'm not who you expected. My sister was supposed to come, but she changed her mind. I'm the practical one, the plain one, the one they sent instead. If you want me to leave, I understand. But somewhere around Kansas, watching endless prairie roll past the train window, the script began to change. I'm not who you expected, but I'm here. I can work. I can help. Give me a chance. By the time she reached Cheyenne, exhausted and dust-covered, the confession had evolved into something closer to hope. The stage to Powder Ridge left at dawn. Cora spent her last night in civilization, in a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and unwashed bodies, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling while her mind churned. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would meet him. Tomorrow her life would either begin or end. She rose before first light and made her way to the stage office, where a handful of other passengers already waited. A young couple heading to a mining claim, a drummer with cases of patent medicine, an older woman in widow's weeds who said nothing to anyone. The driver, a leathery man who introduced himself as Dutch, helped load the luggage with efficient disinterest. Powder Ridge by nightfall if the weather holds, he announced. Stage stops twice for team changes, necessary facilities at each stop, no smoking inside the coach. Cora climbed aboard, settling into the corner seat and clutching her carpet bag. Inside was the photograph, Lydia's photograph, and Rhett's letters, which she'd taken from her sister's desk, evidence of the deception. Proof of her guilt. She should throw them away, burn them, but she couldn't quite bring herself to do it. The stage lurched into motion just as the sun broke the horizon, painting the mountains to the west in shades of gold and rose. Cora pressed her face to the window, drinking in the sight. She'd never seen mountains before. Not real ones. Not like these. They rose up from the earth like promises, like possibilities, like everything Boston had never offered her. The young wife across from her smiled. "First time west?" "Yes," Cora managed. "Us too. Jim's got a silver claim waiting. We're going to make our fortune." The girl couldn't have been more than 19, her face bright with optimism that hadn't yet been worn down by reality. "I hope you do," Cora said, and meant it. "What brings you out here?" The question she'd been dreading. Cora's fingers tightened on her carpet bag. "I'm meeting someone in Powder Ridge." "A husband?" The girl's eyes lit up. "How romantic. Is it a love match?" "It's complicated," Cora said, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd spoken in days. The miles rolled past. The landscape shifted from plains to foothills, from grassland to pine forest. They stopped twice to change horses, each station a rough collection of buildings that made the Cheyenne boarding house look palatial by comparison. Cora forced down coffee that tasted like liquid dirt and hardtack that could have been used for building materials. This was her life now. This rawness, this roughness. No more parlors and calling cards. No more pretending she belonged in a world built for women like Lydia. As afternoon faded toward evening, Dutch called down from the driver's seat. "Powder Ridge, 30 minutes!" Cora's heart kicked against her ribs. 30 minutes. Half an hour until she came face to face with the man who'd fallen for her sister's photograph, the man who'd written those thoughtful, lonely letters, the man who thought he was getting golden-haired beauty and would instead find sun-worn practicality. She pulled out the photograph one last time. Lydia smiled up at her, frozen in perfect sepia confidence. For a wild moment, Cora imagined tearing it to pieces and scattering them across the Wyoming territory. What freedom that would be, to destroy the evidence, to step off this stage as herself, to let Rhett Calloway choose or reject the truth of her. But fear won, as it always did. She tucked the photograph back into her bag. The stage crested a rise, and suddenly the valley opened before them, a vast sweep of grassland dotted with cattle, mountains rising purple in the distance, and there, huddled against the approaching darkness, the town of Powder Ridge. 24 buildings, maybe. A main street of packed dirt, lights beginning to glow in windows. So small, so raw, so impossibly far from everything she'd ever known. The stage rattled down the slope and into town, pulling up before a building with Powell's Mercantile and Stage Office painted across its false front. A small crowd had gathered. Apparently the stage's arrival was entertainment in a place this size. Dutch set the brake and climbed down. "Powder Ridge, end of the line!" Cora couldn't move. Her legs had turned to water, her breath coming short and shallow. Through the window she could see people milling about, but she couldn't tell which one might be Rhett Calloway. Would he step forward? Would she recognize him somehow? "Miss?" The young wife was watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Cora lied. She forced her hands to work, gathering her carpet bag and the small valise that held her most essential possessions. The larger trunk would be unloaded by the driver. The door swung open. Dutch stood there, offering his hand. "Down you come, miss. Mind the step." Cora took his hand and descended, her legs trembling. The moment her feet hit the ground, Wyoming wind hit her face, cold and sharp, and carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke and something wild she couldn't name. It cut through her travel exhaustion like a knife, shockingly clean and fresh after days of coal smoke and close quarters. This was it, the moment of truth. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd, looking for Miss Delaney. The voice came from her left, deep, careful, touched with something that might have been hope or might have been uncertainty. Cora turned and found herself looking up into the face of Rhett Calloway. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands. His face was weathered from sun and wind, all hard planes and sharp angles, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. Dark hair, gray eyes that held too many shadows. Maybe 30, maybe older. War veteran, his letters had said, and she could see it in the way he carried himself, the military bearing that never quite faded, the watchfulness of someone who'd learned to expect ambush. Not handsome, exactly, but striking, real, solid. And in his hands, he held Lydia's photograph. His eyes moved from the photograph to Cora's face and back again, confusion flickering across his features. She watched him process it, the wrong hair color, the wrong face shape, the complete wrongness of her compared to the woman he'd been expecting. This was it. Confess now. Get it over with. Mr. Calloway, Cora heard herself say, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. I'm Cora Delaney, Lydia's sister. I need to explain. You're not her. It wasn't a question, and his tone gave nothing away. He looked down at the photograph again, then back at Cora, his expression carefully neutral. Where is she? The crowd had gone quiet. Of course they had. In a town this small, drama was currency. Cora lifted her chin. She would not cower. She would not apologize for existing. In Boston, she changed her mind. My father sent me instead. I understand if you want to send me back. I'll wait at the boarding house until the next stage. The words came out clipped, practical, stripped of emotion. This was what she did. Faced hard truths, dealt with disappointment, made herself small and uncomplicated so as not to burden anyone with her feelings. Rhett Calloway studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. The silence stretched until Cora wanted to scream. Finally, he spoke. You came all this way. Yes. Knowing I expected someone else. Yes. That took courage. He folded the photograph carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Or desperation. Which is it? The question caught her off guard. Honesty or self-preservation? Cora met his gaze and chose truth. Both. Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite a smile, but something close to respect. Fair enough. He glanced at Dutch, who was unloading luggage with exaggerated slowness, clearly eavesdropping on every word. That your trunk? Yes. The brown one. Rhett moved to collect it, shouldering the weight easily. When he turned back, his expression had shifted to something more businesslike. It's a 30-minute ride to the ranch? We can talk there? Unless you'd rather stay in town tonight? It was an out, a gracious exit. She could stay at the boarding house, think things through, decide what she really wanted. But when would she ever get another chance at this? Another chance at escape, at freedom, at a life that didn't require her to be anyone's shadow? I'll come to the ranch, Cora said. Rhett nodded once, curt and efficient. The wagon's this way. He turned and headed down the street, not waiting to see if she followed. Cora glanced back at the stage, at Dutch, who winked at her with what might have been encouragement. Then she gathered her skirts and hurried after Rhett Calloway, her heart hammering a rhythm that felt suspiciously like hope. Oh, the wagon was utilitarian, rough wooden slats, a canvas cover, two patient horses who barely flicked an ear at Cora's approach. Rhett loaded her trunk into the back with practiced efficiency, then offered his hand to help her onto the seat. His palm was calloused, warm despite the evening chill. Cora climbed up, arranging her skirts, hyper-aware of the solid presence beside her as Rhett settled into place and took up the reins. They rolled out of town in silence. Cora snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the thoughtful letter writer with the stern man beside her. His hands on the reins were sure and steady. His profile could have been cut from granite. I read your letters, she said finally, unable to bear the silence. Lydia left them behind. I'm sorry, I know it was an invasion of privacy, but I wanted to understand who you were before I came. Did they help? His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Yes, you write beautifully. You write. About the land, especially. I could almost see it through your words. And now you're seeing it for real. He gestured with his chin toward the vista unfolding around them as they left the town behind. What do you think? Cora looked, really looked. The valley spread out like something from a painting, rolling grassland painted gold in the last light of day, mountains rising sharp against the sky, the river cutting a silver ribbon through it all. The air tasted clean and cold, so different from Boston's coal smoke and sea salt. Above them, the sky was deepening from blue to indigo, and already stars were beginning to emerge. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. She struggled for words. It's so big, so open, like the whole world is right here, and no one can tell you what to do with it. When she glanced at him, she caught the ghost of a smile on his hard face. That's exactly it, he said quietly. That's why I came out here after the war. Needed space that couldn't be filled with ghosts. The honesty surprised her. Your letters mentioned Gettysburg, Antietam, the wilderness. His hands tightened briefly on the reins, then relaxed with visible effort. Lost my brother at Gettysburg. 18 years old. Thought he was invincible. He shook his head. I learned different. We all did. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but what else could she say? She'd lived through the war years in Boston, reading casualty lists in newspapers, watching families receive telegram after telegram, but she'd never faced the reality of it, the blood and death and breaking. It was a long time ago, but his voice said otherwise. The land helps, working with your hands, building something, watching cattle thrive. It's not meaning exactly, but it's purpose. That's enough most days. They fell silent again, but it felt different now, less awkward, more contemplative. The wagon creaked along the rutted road, the horses' hooves a steady rhythm. Darkness gathered in the valleys while the mountain peaks still held the last light. Why did she change her mind? Rhett asked finally. Your sister. Cora chose her words carefully. Lydia is beautiful. Very beautiful. She's never had to think beyond next week because men have always fallen over themselves to give her whatever she wants. She paused. I think she saw your letters as entertainment, something exotic and exciting. She never truly intended to come. But she sent her photograph. She accepted my proposal. Yes. There was no way to soften it. She did. And when the reality arrived, when you confirmed travel arrangements, she panicked. Our father was furious. He sent me instead. Cora looked down at her hands, clasped tight in her lap. I'm sorry. You deserve better than this deception. Do you want to be here? The question caught her off balance. Does it matter? Yes. He pulled the horses to a stop and turned to face her fully for the first time since leaving town. In the deepening darkness, his eyes were shadows, but his voice was steady and serious. If you're here because you had no choice, because your father forced you to clean up your sister's mess, then we should settle accounts right now. I'll give you funds for passage back east, and we'll call this whole thing a bad idea. But if... He paused, seeming to gather his words. If there's any part of you that wants to be here, that wants to try this, then we can move forward. I'm not expecting love or even affection. I'm expecting honesty and partnership. Can you give me that? It was the most anyone had ever asked her, not what she could do for them, but what she wanted for herself. Cora's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I don't know if I want to be here specifically, she said slowly, but I know I don't want to go back. I've spent 24 years being the practical daughter, the one who holds everything together while everyone else gets to be complicated and interesting. I've been invisible my whole life, Mr. Calloway. If I go back, I'll die invisible. She met his gaze, no longer caring if he saw her desperation. So yes, I want to try. I can't promise I'll be what you need, but I can promise I'll work harder than anyone you've ever met. I can cook and clean and mend. I can learn livestock and ranching. I'm strong and I don't quit. Her voice dropped. And I'll never ever lie to you again. Rhett studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, picked up the reins, and clicked to the horses. All right then, let's go home. Home. The word resonated in Cora's chest like a bell. They crested a rise, and there it was, lit by lamplight spilling from the windows, a log house nestled against a stand of pines. Not large, but solid. Real. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see the outline of a barn beyond, and corrals, and the dark shapes of cattle in the distance. The Calloway Ranch. Rhett pulled up before the house and set the brake. "Welcome to your new life, Miss Delaney," he said. "I hope you don't regret it." Cora climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from travel, her heart pounding with terror and exhilaration in equal measure. She looked up at the log house, at the vast sky stretching overhead, at the mountain standing guard in the distance. This was hers now, this rough, raw, beautiful life. No more shadows, no more apologizing for existing. She turned to find Rhett watching her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "I won't regret it," she said firmly. "I promise you that." And for the first time in her life, Cora Delaney chose to believe her own words. The house was warmer than she expected, not just from the fire crackling in the stone hearth, but from the careful attention in its details. Handmade furniture, sturdy and well-crafted. Bookshelves filled with volumes that suggested an educated mind. A quilt on the rocking chair that had been stitched with obvious care, if not expertise. Windows that faced east to catch the sunrise. "It's not much," Rhett said, setting her trunk down near the door. "But it's solid. Built it myself after I bought the land." "It's lovely," Cora said honestly. After the austere coldness of her father's house, this felt almost cozy. "You did this all yourself?" "Mostly. Caleb, my ranch hand, helped with the roof. Martha Boone lent me her horse team for the heavy logs. Out here, you learn to rely on your neighbors." He moved to the hearth, adding a log to the fire. "You must be exhausted. Hungry too, I'd imagine." As if summoned by the words, Cora's stomach growled audibly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything substantial. The hardtack at the way station didn't count. Rhett's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "I'll show you the kitchen. Fair warning, I'm not much of a cook. Mostly survive on fried meat and beans." "I can cook," Cora said quickly. "If you'll show me where things are, I can make us something." He hesitated. "You just traveled for 8 days. You should rest." "Mr. Calloway," Cora said firmly, "I need to be useful. It's what I do. Please, let me cook." Understanding flickered in his eyes, the recognition of someone who also used work to fill the empty spaces. He nodded. "Kitchen's through here." It was small but well organized, with a good iron stove and a hand pump for water. The pantry held basics: flour, salt, lard, dried beans, a few precious eggs, bacon in the cold box. Nothing fancy, but enough to work with. Cora rolled up her sleeves and got to work. It felt good to move with purpose, to fall into the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing. She made biscuits, fried bacon and eggs, even managed a simple gravy with the bacon drippings. Rhett sat at the table and watched, not hovering, not offering unnecessary help, just present. It was surprisingly comfortable. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" he asked as she set 2 plates on the table. "My mother, before she died. Then necessity after." Cora sat across from him, suddenly self-conscious. "We had a cook for a while, but father let her go after his business troubles. It fell to me to keep the household running." "And your sister?" Lydia was never expected to learn. It came out more bitter than she intended. Cora took a bite of biscuit to cover the moment. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Rhett said quietly, "Thank you. This is the best meal I've had in months." "It's just biscuits and eggs." "It's more than that." He met her gaze across the table. "It's someone caring enough to make the effort. That's rare out here." Cora didn't know what to say to that, so she focused on her food. But something warm had kindled in her chest. Not quite happiness, but maybe its precursor. Hope's younger sibling. After dinner, Rhett showed her to the small bedroom off the main room. "This was going to be, He paused. "Well, it's yours now. I sleep in the loft. There's a lock on the door if it makes you more comfortable." The consideration surprised her. "Thank you. We'll talk more tomorrow. Figure out how this is going to work." He lingered in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Miss Delaney, Cora, I meant what I said earlier. I'm not expecting love. I'm not even expecting affection. I'm expecting partnership, honesty. Can we start there?" "Yes," Cora said. "We can start there." He nodded and withdrew, pulling the door closed behind him. Cora stood in the center of her new room, hers alone, and felt tears sting her eyes. She'd spent 8 days terrified of this moment, 8 days rehearsing rejection, preparing for disappointment. But Rhett Calloway hadn't rejected her. He'd offered her partnership. He'd asked what she wanted. No one had ever asked her that before. Cora unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on the pegs, arranging her mother's brooch on the small dresser. Then she washed her face in the basin, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. The mattress was firm, the quilts heavy and warm. Through the window she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow she would have to prove herself, to show Rhett Calloway that she could be what he needed. Tomorrow she would start learning how to be a rancher's wife in a harsh, unforgiving land. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Cora Delaney went to sleep in a place where she wasn't anyone's shadow. She was just Cora, and that was enough. The rooster's crow shattered Cora's sleep before dawn had fully broken. She jerked upright, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness, her heart hammering until memory rushed back. Wyoming, the ranch, Rhett Calloway's spare bedroom with its simple furniture and the weight of quilts she wasn't used to. She was here. She'd really done it. Through the single window, the sky was just beginning to pale from black to gray, that peculiar pre-dawn light that belonged to neither night nor day. Cora threw back the covers, her breath misting in the cold air. The fire in the main room must have died during the night. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on her sturdiest dress and the work apron she'd packed. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. She was nervous, she realized. Nervous about what this first full day would bring, about whether she'd measure up to whatever expectations Rhett Calloway held. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room empty but not cold. Someone had already rebuilt the fire, and coffee was brewing on the stove. Through the window, she could see Rhett's tall figure heading toward the barn, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He'd let her sleep. The consideration touched something in her chest. Cora moved to the kitchen, assessing what she had to work with. Eggs, bacon again, the last of yesterday's biscuits. She could make a proper breakfast, something substantial for a man who'd already been working for an hour, while she'd lain abed like some useless ornament. She was elbow-deep in mixing pancake batter when the door opened. Rhett stamped his boots on the threshold, bringing with him the scent of hay and livestock and cold morning air. "You're up," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "The rooster doesn't believe in sleeping late." Cora poured batter onto the griddle, watching it sizzle and bubble. "I hope you like pancakes. I found some molasses in the pantry. I like anything I don't have to cook myself." He hung his coat on the peg by the door and moved to the wash basin, scrubbing his hands clean. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." Cora flipped the pancakes with practiced efficiency. "You've given me shelter and the chance at a new life. The least I can do is earn my keep." She felt his eyes on her back but didn't turn around. After a moment, he said quietly, "You're not a servant, Cora. This is meant to be a partnership." "Then let me be a partner who contributes." She plated the pancakes and carried them to the table, along with the molasses and the last precious pat of butter. "Sit, eat. Then you can tell me what needs doing around here." Rhett obeyed, settling into his chair with the wary posture of a man unused to being cared for. He took a bite, and his eyes closed briefly. "Good Lord, where did you learn to make pancakes like this?" "Practice." Cora poured coffee for both of them, then sat across from him with her own plate. "My mother believed that any task worth doing was worth doing well. She taught me that about cooking, about sewing, about keeping a home." She paused, her throat tightening unexpectedly. "She died before she could teach me everything, but I learned what I could." "She'd be proud of you," Rhett said, "coming all this way, starting fresh." "Maybe." Cora wasn't so sure. Her mother had been gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who believed a lady's place was in the parlor, not mucking out stalls or traveling alone across a continent. Or maybe she'd be horrified. "Does it matter?" Rhett's gray eyes held hers across the table. "You're here now. What anyone back east thinks doesn't change that." It was exactly what she needed to hear. Cora felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety she'd been carrying since Boston. "You're right, thank you." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. When Cora rose to clear the dishes, Rhett stopped her with a raised hand. Leave them. I want to show you around before the day gets away from us. You should know what you're dealing with." He wasn't wrong. Cora had arrived in darkness and exhaustion, with no real sense of the ranch's layout or scope. She followed him outside, pulling her shawl tight against the morning cold. The sun was just cresting the mountains now, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. The ranch sprawled before her, the barn, a large weathered structure that looked solid despite its age, the corrals holding perhaps a dozen horses, a chicken coop from which the aggressive rooster crowed his dominance, and beyond it all, rolling grassland dotted with cattle stretching to the horizon. 2,000 acres, Rhett said, following her gaze. Most of it grazing land for the cattle. I run about 500 head right now, mostly Herefords. Good beef cattle, hardy enough for the winters here. He pointed toward a smaller building near the barn. Bunkhouse there for Caleb and any seasonal hands I hire during roundup. Smokehouse, tool shed, and that's the root cellar built into the hillside. Cora turned slowly, taking it all in. It was overwhelming, so much space, so much responsibility. How do you manage it all? Carefully. A hint of dry humor touched his voice. Caleb helps with the day-to-day. Martha Boone's ranch is 3 miles north. She's got 2 hands who sometimes work for me during busy seasons. We help each other out here. Have to. A young man emerged from the barn leading a saddled horse. He was perhaps 20, with sandy hair and an easy smile that brightened when he saw them. "Morning, boss. This must be the bride." "Caleb Reeves. Meet Cora Delaney." Rhett's tone was carefully neutral. "Cora, this is my ranch hand. He's been with me 3 years now." "Ma'am." Caleb swept off his hat with an exaggerated bow that would have been ridiculous if not for the genuine warmth in his expression. "Welcome to Powder Ridge. I gotta say, I'm mighty glad the boss finally got himself some proper company out here." "Thank you," Cora managed, unsure how to respond to such open friendliness. "Caleb, we need to check the north fence line today," Rhett said. "Storm 2 weeks back knocked down some posts." "Already on it, boss. Just heading out now." Caleb swung into the saddle with the easy grace of someone born to it. He tipped his hat to Cora. "Nice meeting you, Mrs. Calloway." He rode off before Cora could correct him. Mrs. Calloway. She wasn't that, not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on how things developed. The assumption sat strangely on her shoulders. "Don't mind Caleb," Rhett said, apparently reading her discomfort. "He's young and assumes the best of everything. It's not a bad quality to have." He started toward the barn. "Come on, I'll show you the livestock operation." The barn was warmer than outside, filled with the familiar smells of hay and horse and leather. 4 horses occupied the stalls. Working animals, Rhett explained, sturdy and reliable rather than flashy. Cora approached one, a bay mare with kind eyes, and let the horse snuffle at her palm. "You ride?" Rhett asked. "A little. Nothing fancy." Cora stroked the mare's nose. "My father kept a horse for his carriage, and the stable boy used to let me sit on her back when I was young, but I haven't ridden in years." "You'll need to learn properly if you're staying. Can't get around a ranch this size on foot." He moved to the next stall, where a massive black gelding watched them with intelligent eyes. "This is Gunpowder. He's mine. Steady as they come, even when things get rough." "Did you bring him from the war?" "No. Bought him here after I mustered out, my army horse." Rhett's jaw tightened. He didn't make it home. The grief in those few words was palpable. Cora thought of the letters she'd read, the careful way he'd written about the war's shadows. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." "Everything about that war was hard." He turned away from the stall, his shoulders rigid. "Come on, I'll show you the chickens. Fair warning, that rooster's a mean bastard. He's drawn blood more than once." Cora laughed despite herself. "I'm not afraid of a rooster." "You should be. That one thinks he's a fighting cock." The chicken coop was exactly as advertised. A small building housing perhaps 20 hens and one extremely aggressive rooster who puffed up and charged the moment Cora approached. She sidestepped his attack with the ease of long practice, caught him by the body before he could wheel around for another assault, and tucked him firmly under her arm. "Listen here," she told the bird seriously. "I've dealt with far more intimidating males than you. We can be friends, or we can be enemies. But either way, I'm collecting eggs from your ladies every morning. Your choice." The rooster regarded her with one beady eye, seemed to reassess his position, and settled with a disgruntled cluck. When Cora looked up, Rhett was staring at her with something that might have been wonder. "How did you do that?" "Practice." She released the rooster, who shook his feathers and stalked away with as much dignity as he could muster. "My father kept chickens. I've been collecting eggs since I was 8 years old." She moved to the nesting boxes, gathering the morning's offerings with efficient care. "This is a good flock, healthy, well-fed. You take good care of them." "Eggs are valuable out here. Can't afford to lose birds to neglect or predators." He held the door for her as she emerged with a basket full of brown eggs. "You're full of surprises, Cora Delaney." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Good," he said firmly. "Definitely good." "I was expecting—" He trailed off, seeming to think better of finishing the sentence. "A useless ornament?" Cora supplied. "Someone who'd wilt at the sight of honest work? That's what you'd have gotten if Lydia had come." Rhett's expression turned thoughtful. Maybe that's why it worked out this way. The universe correcting a mistake. Or just dumb luck. I'll take it either way. They were heading back to the house when a wagon appeared on the road, a sturdy vehicle pulled by a matched pair of grays. Rhett's posture shifted, not quite tension, but increased alertness. "That'll be Martha." "Your neighbor?" "And the nosiest woman in Wyoming territory." But there was affection in his voice. "Fair warning. She's going to interrogate you 6 ways from Sunday. Martha Boone doesn't believe in polite restraint." The wagon pulled up before the house, and the driver proved to be a woman of perhaps 50, weather-worn and solid, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She climbed down with the ease of someone half her age and planted her hands on her hips as she surveyed Cora. "So you're the bride," Martha said flatly. "You're not what I expected." "Martha," Rhett began, a warning note in his voice. "Oh, hush, boy. I'm not insulting her, just observing." Martha moved closer, circling Cora like a general inspecting troops. "Good, strong build, practical clothes, hands that know work. And you faced down Rhett's devil rooster. I saw that from the road." She stopped in front of Cora and extended her hand. "Martha Boone. I run the horse ranch north of here. Welcome to the valley." Cora shook her hand, surprised by the strength of the older woman's grip. "Thank you, Mrs. Boone." "Martha, we don't stand on ceremony out here." She turned to Rhett. "You gonna invite me in for coffee? Or am I standing in the cold like a stranger?" "Come in," Rhett sighed. "I'll put the kettle on." Inside, Martha settled at the table with the air of someone who'd done it many times before. She accepted coffee with a grunt of thanks and fixed Cora with a penetrating stare. "All right, girl, let's have it. Where's the yellow-haired sister who was supposed to show up?" "Martha," Rhett said sharply. "That's enough." "It's all right." Cora took a breath and met Martha's gaze steadily. "My sister Lydia was supposed to come. She changed her mind at the last moment. My father sent me instead. Mr. Calloway has been gracious enough to let me stay despite the deception." "Gracious," Martha snorted. "That's one word for it. Desperate's another. This boy's been rattling around this ranch alone for 3 years, eating his own terrible cooking and talking to his horse like it's people. He needs someone practical, not some painted doll who'd faint at the sight of blood." "Martha." Rhett's voice held a note of embarrassment now. "What? It's true." She returned her attention to Cora. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Sew?" "Yes." "Handle livestock? Mend fence? Fire a rifle if you need to?" "I can learn." Cora lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Boone. I've been running my father's household for 6 years. I can do whatever needs doing." Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good. You'll do." She gulped her coffee and stood. "I came by to invite you both to dinner tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. Don't be late." She fixed Rhett with a stern look. "And bring something for dessert. Your pie-making skills are legendary for all the wrong reasons." "I'll make something," Cora offered quickly. "See? Practical already." Martha headed for the door, then paused and looked back at Cora. "One more thing, girl. The men in this valley talk. They'll say things about mail-order brides, about women who come west looking for husbands. You pay them no mind. You hold your head high. and you do your work, and they'll come around. Her expression softened just slightly. And if they don't, you come tell me. I've got a shotgun and a mean disposition. Then she was gone, leaving only the echo of wagon wheels on the hard-packed road. Cora sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Is everyone out here that direct? Martha's in a category of her own. Rhett refilled her coffee cup. But she likes you. That's important. Martha Boone's approval carries weight in this valley. I noticed she called me the bride. She didn't seem surprised that I wasn't Lydia. I may have sent word ahead. Rhett had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. After your father's letter arrived explaining the switch, I wanted Martha to know so she wouldn't... He gestured vaguely. Well, she still did anyway. That's Martha. You told her the truth about the substitution? Cora wasn't sure whether to be grateful or mortified. I did, and she said, and I quote, "Good. The practical one will last longer than a hothouse flower." Martha's got strong opinions about most things. Before Cora could respond, hoofbeats announced another arrival. Through the window, she saw Caleb riding hard toward the house, his face urgent. Rhett was already moving toward the door. Something's wrong. Caleb pulled up in a spray of dirt and dust. Boss, north pasture, 3 head of cattle down. Looks like sickness. Rhett's face went hard. How bad? Bad enough. They're stumbling, frothing at the mouth. I've seen it before when I worked for the Hendersons. Could be poison weed. Damn. Rhett grabbed his coat. Get the horses saddled. We need to move the rest of the herd before whatever it is spreads. He glanced back at Cora. I'll be gone most of the day. Maybe longer. Can you manage here alone? Of course. Cora stood. Is there anything I can do to help? Keep the home fires burning. That's help enough. He was already halfway out the door when he turned back. And Cora, lock the doors after I leave, just a precaution. There's a rifle above the mantel if you need it. Then he was gone, thundering off toward the north pasture with Caleb at his side. Cora stood in the sudden silence of the empty house, her heart pounding. This was what ranch life meant, she realized. Crises that arose without warning, dangers that threatened livelihoods, men who rode out to face problems while women held down the fort. She could do this. She would do this. Cora spent the rest of the morning throwing herself into work. She scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, did the washing and hung it to dry in the cold wind, mended a shirt of Rhett's she'd found with a torn sleeve. She baked bread and made a beef stew that could simmer all day, something hearty for when the men returned exhausted. By afternoon, she'd run out of obvious tasks. The house was clean, the bread cooling on the sideboard, the stew filling the air with savory promise. Restless energy drove her outside to explore the immediate grounds more thoroughly. The root cellar, built into a hillside behind the house, proved to be well stocked with potatoes, turnips, carrots, and apples. Winter stores that would see them through the cold months. The smokehouse held several hams and sides of bacon. The tool shed was meticulously organized, every implement in its place. Rhett Calloway, for all his claims of being just a simple rancher, ran a tight operation. Cora was examining the kitchen garden, dormant now for winter but showing signs of having been productive, when she heard the distant sound of cattle lowing. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and saw the herd moving across the far pasture. Tiny figures on horseback guided them, Rhett and Caleb working in tandem to relocate the animals away from whatever had sickened the others. It was beautiful in a way she hadn't expected. The organized chaos of herding, the partnership between horse and rider, the vast landscape holding it all. This was Rhett's life, his purpose. The thing he'd built from nothing after the war tried to break him, and she was part of it now, or trying to be. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when the men finally returned. Cora had the table set, the stew steaming in bowls, fresh bread sliced and waiting. She heard them at the barn first, the sound of horses being unsaddled and rubbed down, the low murmur of male voices. When Rhett finally entered the house, he looked exhausted. Dirt streaked his face, his clothes were filthy, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who dealt with loss. How bad? Cora asked quietly. Lost 5 head total. Had to shoot 2 that were too far gone to save. He sank into a chair, his shoulders bowed. Caleb was right. Poison weed in the North Creek bed. I should have noticed it before. Should have checked after that storm. You can't predict everything. It's my job to predict these things. Frustration roughened his voice. 5 head is $500 minimum, probably more. That's not counting the risk if it had spread to the rest of the herd. Cora set a bowl of stew in front of him. Eat. You'll think better with food in you. Caleb appeared in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold until Cora gestured him inside. Come on. There's plenty. The young ranch hand took a seat, his usual cheerfulness dimmed. Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to intrude on your dinner. You're not intruding. You've been working all day. She served him as well, then took her own seat. Both of you eat before it gets cold. They obeyed with the mechanical movements of exhausted men. After a few bites, Caleb's eyes widened. Ma'am, this is real good. It's just stew. Best stew I've had in months. He looked at Rhett. Boss, you better marry this woman quick before she realizes she can do better. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat too long. Cora felt heat rising in her cheeks. Rhett's expression was unreadable. Finish your food, Caleb, he said finally. Then get some rest. We need to burn that poison weed patch tomorrow before more cattle wander into it. Yes, sir. Caleb ducked his head, seemingly realizing he'd overstepped. They ate in silence after that. When Caleb left for the bunkhouse and Cora began clearing dishes, Rhett stopped her with a hand on her arm. The touch was brief but warm. Thank you, he said quietly. For today. For keeping things together here while I dealt with the crisis. For making food and, he gestured vaguely, for not panicking or demanding I explain everything or deciding this was all too much. This is what partnership means, isn't it? Cora met his eyes. You handle what you're good at, I handle what I'm good at, and we both survive. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect? Yes, that's exactly what it means. He released her arm and stepped back. I'm going to wash up and turn in. Tomorrow's another long day. Sleep well. You too, Cora. After he'd climbed to the loft and the house had grown quiet, Cora stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark valley. Somewhere out there, 5 dead cattle lay in the north pasture, casualties of nature's indifference. Somewhere beyond the mountains, her sister was probably asleep in her comfortable Boston bedroom, never knowing or caring about the life Cora had stepped into. And here, in this log house on the edge of wilderness, Cora Delaney was becoming someone new, someone useful, someone necessary. She touched the window glass, feeling its cold solidity, and smiled. The next morning brought Martha Boone's dinner invitation back to mind. Cora spent the afternoon baking a dried apple pie with cinnamon and a hint of precious nutmeg she'd found in the spice collection. Rhett watched her work with the fascination of a man who'd never seen pastry made from scratch. Where did you learn that? He asked, as she crimped the crust with practiced fingers. My mother, she said a woman should know how to feed people properly, not just fill their stomachs. Cora brushed egg wash over the top crust. Food is how you show care when words aren't enough. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I wish... Cora trailed off, the old grief catching in her throat. I wish I'd had more time with her. There was so much she didn't get to teach me. She taught you enough? Rhett's voice was gentle. You're here, aren't you? Making a life in a place most Boston girls would run screaming from. That takes the kind of strength she must have given you. The words settled warm in Cora's chest. She slid the pie into the oven and turned to find Rhett watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. What? She asked. Nothing. Just, I'm glad you're here, even if the circumstances were complicated. Before Cora could respond, he was gone, heading back outside to work, leaving her alone with the sweet smell of baking pie and the strange flutter in her chest that his words had caused. Martha Boone's ranch proved to be larger than Rhett's, with extensive horse corrals and a main house that sprawled comfortable and worn. Martha met them at the door wearing an apron and her perpetual no-nonsense expression. Punctual. Good. She took the pie from Cora's hands and sniffed appreciatively. This'll do. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of roasting meat and baking bread. 2 ranch hands were already seated at the long table, young men who jumped to their feet when Cora entered. This is Danny and Tom, Martha said briskly. They work for me. Boys, this is Cora Delaney, Rhett's intended. Mind your manners. The evening passed in a blur of good food and better company. Martha ruled her table like a benevolent dictator, keeping conversation flowing and making sure everyone ate their fill. The ranch hands treated Cora with careful respect, asking polite questions about her journey west and her impressions of Wyoming. It was Rhett, though, who surprised her most. In Martha's house, with friends around him, he relaxed in a way Cora hadn't yet seen. He laughed at Danny's terrible jokes, swapped war stories with Tom, who'd served in a different regiment, and even teased Martha about her legendary stubbornness. This was the man who'd written those thoughtful letters, Cora realized. This was who he'd been before loneliness and isolation had built walls around him. After dinner, while the men settled in the parlor with coffee, Martha pulled Cora aside to help with dishes. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Martha spoke. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Rhett, one of the best I've known, but he's been hurt. War, losing his brother, coming out here alone to build something from nothing. It's made him careful." "I understand careful," Cora said, scrubbing a plate. "I've been careful my whole life." "That's so?" Martha gave her a sharp look. "Then why'd you come all the way out here based on someone else's lie?" The directness should have been shocking. Instead, Cora found it refreshing. "Because being careful in Boston was slowly killing me. At least out here, if I fail, it'll be my own failure, not just existing in someone else's shadow." Martha nodded slowly. "That's a good answer, an honest one." She dried a plate with sharp, efficient movements. "You'll do all right here, girl. Long as you remember, this land doesn't care about your feelings or your plans. It'll test you every day. The only way through is to be tougher than it is." "I can be tough." "I believe you can." Martha set down her dish towel and faced Cora fully. "One more thing. Rhett doesn't know how to ask for what he needs. Been alone too long. If this marriage is going to work, you'll have to be the one to push, to insist, to refuse to let him hide in his work and his silence." "That seems presumptuous. We barely know each other." "You'll know each other plenty soon enough. Life moves fast out here." Martha's expression softened just slightly. "I'm telling you this because I care about that boy. He's like a son to me, and I think you might be exactly what he needs if you're both brave enough to try." Before Cora could respond, Rhett appeared in the doorway. "Ready to head home? It's getting late." The ride back to the ranch passed in comfortable silence. Above them, stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion, and a half-moon silvered the landscape. Cora found herself thinking about Martha's words, about pushing and insisting and refusing to let Rhett hide. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for tonight, for including me." "You're part of this now," Rhett said simply. "Martha's gatherings, the Valley community, all of it. That's what you signed up for, whether you knew it or not." "I'm starting to realize that." Cora pulled her shawl tighter against the night cold. "It's different from what I expected. Better in some ways. Harder in others." "Regrets?" "No." She said it firmly, surprising herself with the certainty. "No regrets. Not yet, anyway." Rhett was quiet for a moment, then, "Good. Because I don't have regrets either. Despite the circumstances, despite everything, I'm glad you came, Cora." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable in the darkness. Cora's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "So am I." When they reached the house, Rhett helped her down from the wagon with a hand that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and something passed between them, acknowledgement, maybe, or possibility. Then the moment broke, and they went inside to their separate sleeping spaces. But something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. Partnership, Cora thought, as she undressed for bed. That's what they'd agreed to. But maybe, just maybe, partnership could grow into something more, if they were both brave enough to let it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Cora with its rightness. She rose before dawn to make breakfast, spending those quiet morning hours in the warm kitchen while frost painted patterns on the windows. Rhett would appear shortly after, smelling of hay and cold air, and they'd eat together in companionable silence broken only by discussion of the day's tasks. Then he'd disappear into the endless work of the ranch, while Cora tackled her own domain. She learned the quirks of the wood stove, how to coax the most heat from the least fuel, She mastered the art of baking bread in high altitude where everything behaved differently than it had in Boston. She mended clothes and sheets, organized the pantry, made soap from lye and lard, and discovered she had a talent for preserving whatever late-season vegetables Martha brought by. The physical work left her exhausted each night, but satisfied in a way she'd never been in her father's house. This was her home now, her responsibility, and every improvement she made was hers to claim. Rhett noticed. He didn't say much, but she'd catch him pausing in doorways to observe a freshly laundered curtain or the way she'd reorganized his chaotic tool collection. Once, she found a handful of wildflowers on the kitchen table, their stems wrapped carefully in cloth. He never mentioned leaving them, and she never asked, but she pressed one between the pages of her mother's Bible. 3 weeks after her arrival, the first real storm hit. Cora woke to wind howling like a living thing, rattling the windows in their frames. The room was frigid despite the banked fire in the main room, and when she peered outside, she saw nothing but white. Snow fell so thick and fast it erased the world beyond the glass. In the kitchen, Rhett was already dressed for outside work, layering on clothing with the methodical precision of someone who understood winter's teeth. He looked up when she entered, and his expression was grim. "Blizzard," he said flatly. "Could last hours or days. I need to get the livestock secured before it gets worse." "What can I do?" Cora moved to the stove, stoking the fire to blazing life. "Stay inside. Keep the fires going. If I'm not back in 2 hours, don't come looking for me, you understand? Stay in the house, no matter what." The command in his voice should have rankled, but Cora saw the fear beneath it. Men died in blizzards, disappeared 50 feet from their own doors, and froze to death before they could find their way back. "Be careful," she said, instead of arguing. Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly to name. Then he was bundling himself in coat and scarf, pulling on heavy gloves, tying a rope around his waist. The other end he secured to a post by the door. "Lifeline," he explained, catching her confused look. "So I can find my way back if visibility goes to nothing." Then he was gone, swallowed by white chaos the moment he stepped outside. Cora stood at the window and watched his dark form fade to shadow to nothing, the rope paying out behind him like a thread connecting him to safety. Her chest felt tight with worry she had no right to feel for a man she'd known less than a month. She threw herself into work to keep the anxiety at bay. She built up every fire in the house until the rooms were almost uncomfortably warm. She made a huge pot of soup and another of coffee. She gathered every blanket and quilt she could find and piled them near the hearth in case they were needed. She melted snow for extra water. She did everything she could think of to prepare for the possibility that Rhett might come back frostbitten or hypothermic or worse. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Cora's eyes never left the window for more than a few seconds at a time, watching for any sign of movement in the relentless white. The wind shrieked and battered the house, finding every crack and crevice, sending drafts across the floor despite her best efforts to seal them. At the 2-hour mark, her resolve wavered. What if he was hurt? What if he was lying in the snow, unable to follow the rope back? What if she could save him if she just went out there? But she'd promised. And Rhett knew this land in ways she didn't. If he said stay inside, there was a reason. 10 more agonizing minutes crawled past. Then, finally, she saw it. A darker shadow in the white, growing more solid as it approached. The door burst open on a gust of wind and snow, and Rhett stumbled inside, hauling the rope in behind him. His clothes were encrusted with ice, his face red and raw from windburn, but he was moving under his own power. Cora was across the room before she could think, helping him with his frozen coat, guiding him toward the fire. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" "Fine," he managed through chattering teeth. "Cold. Got the livestock secure. Caleb's hunkered down in the B bunkhouse." "Sit." She pushed him into the chair closest to the hearth and began peeling off his frozen outer layers. His hands were like ice, even through the gloves. "Don't move. I'll get blankets and hot coffee." She worked quickly, wrapping him in quilts, pressing a steaming mug into his hands, checking his fingers and face for signs of frostbite. His skin was cold, but not the waxy white that meant real damage. He'd gotten back in time. "You should have come back sooner," she scolded, her fear transmuting into anger now that he was safe. "What if you'd collapsed out there? What if the rope had broken?" Had to finish. His teeth had stopped chattering, but he was still shivering. Couldn't leave the animals to freeze. The animals aren't worth your life. The words came out sharper than she intended. Rhett looked up at her, surprise written across his face. They're my livelihood, my responsibility. And who takes care of the ranch if you die of exposure? Cora knelt before him, her hands gripping his arms through the blankets. You're not invincible, Rhett Calloway. You can't save everything by sheer will. He stared at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his gray eyes, then quietly, no one's worried about me dying in a long time. The admission cracked something open in Cora's chest. She thought of his letters, of the loneliness he'd tried to hide beneath practical descriptions of ranch life, of the war that had taught him to expect death at every turn, of 3 years spent alone in this house with no one to care if he came back from the barn. Well, someone's worrying now, she said firmly. So next time there's a blizzard, you take appropriate precautions and you come back before you turn into a popsicle. Understood? The corner of his mouth quirked up, not quite a smile, but close. Understood. She made him drink another cup of coffee and eat a bowl of hot soup before she was satisfied he was truly recovering. By then the worst of his shivering had passed, and color was returning to his face. The storm raged on outside, battering the house with fists of wind, but they were safe and warm within these log walls. Thank you, Rhett said eventually, his voice rough. For being ready. For knowing what to do. I didn't do anything. You did everything that mattered. He met her eyes over the rim of his coffee cup. Most women would have panicked or fallen apart. You prepared. You stayed calm. He paused, seeming to search for words. You made this feel like a home someone wants to come back to. Cora's throat tightened with emotion she didn't know how to express. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? Partnership. Partnership, he echoed, but the word sounded different coming from him now. Weighted with something more than practicality. The blizzard lasted 2 days. 2 days of enforced closeness in the small house, of conversations that ranged from mundane to surprisingly deep, of long silences that felt companionable rather than awkward. They played chess using a battered set Rhett had inherited from the previous landowner. They read aloud from books by firelight. They cooked together when Cora insisted on teaching him how to make a proper stew. You need to know this, she argued when he protested. What if something happens to me? You'll starve trying to live on fried meat and beans. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that. She guided his hands through cutting vegetables. Life is unpredictable. We both need to be able to survive without the other. It was a sobering thought, but a necessary one. Out here, injury and illness could strike without warning. They were partners, yes, but they also needed to be self-sufficient. On the second night, as wind continued to howl and snow piled higher against the windows, Rhett asked about her mother. They were sitting by the fire, Cora mending a shirt and Rhett oiling his tack, both of them comfortable in the warm circle of lamplight. What was she like? He asked. Your mother. You mention her often, but always in fragments. Cora's needle stilled. She was gentle, kind, the sort of person who saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. She smiled, remembering. My father was always harsh, always disappointed in something or someone, but Mother had this way of softening the edges of his criticism, of making Lydia and me feel loved even when Father made it clear we'd failed some expectation. She sounds special. She was. I didn't appreciate it enough when she was alive. I was young, foolish, too caught up in being jealous of Lydia to see what I had right in front of me. The old regret ached in Cora's chest. When she got sick, it happened so fast. Pneumonia 1 week, fever the next, gone before we'd even processed that she might die. I never got to tell her. Her voice cracked. I never got to thank her for everything she taught me. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then, she knew. Mothers always know. How can you be sure? Because you're here, making a home, taking care of things, being exactly who she raised you to be. That's the best thank you could have given her. He looked down at the leather in his hands. My mother died when I was 12. I used to think I didn't remember much about her, but then I'll do something, make a decision, respond to a situation in a certain way, and I'll realize it's her in me, Her lessons, her values, her strength. She's gone, but she's not gone. You understand? Cora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This was the most personal thing Rhett had shared with her. This glimpse into the boy he'd been before war and loss had carved him into the hard man he was now. "What about your brother?" she asked gently. "The one who died at Gettysburg. Will you tell me about him?" Pain flickered across Rhett's face, but he didn't shut down. "James. He was 6 years younger than me, full of fire and conviction about the righteousness of the cause. Enlisted the day he turned 18 despite my parents begging him to wait." Rhett's hand stilled on the tack. "I tried to watch out for him. We were in different regiments, but I always asked around, made sure I knew where his unit was deployed. Thought if I kept track of him, I could somehow keep him safe." "But you couldn't." "No." The word was barely a whisper. "Pickett's charge, third day of Gettysburg. His regiment was in the first wave. I found out 3 days later when the casualty lists were posted. Didn't even get to say goodbye, or—" He broke off, jaw clenched tight. "Sorry, this is an appropriate dinner conversation." "It's not dinner, and there's no one here to judge what's appropriate." Cora set down her mending and moved to sit beside him. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Rhett. That's what having a partner means, sharing the burdens." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the walls he'd built around himself wavering. "I'm not good at this. Talking, sharing. The war taught me to keep things locked down, and 3 years alone out here reinforced it." "Then we'll both learn together." She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. "I'm not good at asking for what I need either. I spent too many years making myself small and unobtrusive. But maybe we can teach each other. Maybe that's part of the partnership too." Rhett turned his hand over, palm up, and Cora slid her fingers into his. His grip was warm and calloused and steady. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped in the firelight, not speaking but communicating something deeper than words. When the storm finally broke on the third morning, the world outside was transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in drifts, pure white under brilliant sunshine, the mountains sharp and clear against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Everything sparkled, pristine and new. Rhett went out first, testing the depth, breaking trail toward the barn. Caleb emerged from the bunkhouse looking none the worse for his confinement, and together they began the work of digging out. Cora bundled herself up and ventured out to help, though she quickly realized she was more hindrance than help in snow this deep. Instead, she focused on the chicken coop, digging a path to the door and checking on the hens. They were huddled together for warmth but alive, clucking their displeasure at the cold. She collected eggs and spread fresh feed, talking to them softly the way she'd done in Boston. "We're all learning to survive out here," she told the rooster, who eyed her with his usual suspicion. "Even you mean, old bird? Talking to chickens now?" Cora spun to find Rhett leaning against the coop door, amusement dancing in his eyes. His cheeks were red from cold and exertion, but he looked more relaxed than she'd seen him. The storm seemed to have cleared something in him along with the sky. "They're good listeners," she said defensively. "Better than most people." "Can't argue with that." He moved into the coop, ducking his head to avoid the low beam. "Livestock all made it through. We were lucky. If I hadn't gotten them all secured before the worst hit—" "But you did." Cora touched his arm. "Stop thinking about what might have happened and focus on what did. Everything's fine. You did your job." "We did our job," he corrected. "I couldn't have stayed out there as long as I did if I hadn't known you were here keeping the house warm and safe." "That matters, Cora. More than you probably realize." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. "Well, good. I'm glad to be useful." "You're more than useful." Rhett's voice had dropped lower, more intimate. "You're essential. This place was just a house before you came. Now it's—" "Home?" she offered quietly. "Yeah, home." They stood there in the chicken coop surrounded by clucking hens, the winter sun streaming through gaps in the walls, and something fundamental shifted between them. This was no longer about convenience or necessity or making the best of a bad situation. This was about two people who'd been lost finding something like belonging in each other. The moment broke when Caleb called from the barn, needing help with something. Rhett touched Cora's cheek briefly, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Then he was gone, striding through the snow to address whatever new crisis awaited. Cora stood in the chicken coop, her heart racing, and realized with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Rhett Calloway. The realization terrified her. Love meant vulnerability. It meant risk. It meant the possibility of devastating loss. She'd come here expecting partnership, practical arrangement, mutual survival. She hadn't bargained on feelings that made her chest ache and her hands shake. But there it was, undeniable and growing stronger every day, in the way her heart leapt when she heard his footsteps on the porch, in the way she caught herself watching him work from the kitchen window, in the way his rare smiles felt like gifts specifically for her. She was falling, had probably been falling since that first night when he'd offered her partnership instead of rejection, and she had no idea if he felt anything similar or if she was simply another responsibility he'd shouldered with his characteristic stoic determination. The uncertainty gnawed at her over the following days. Winter had truly arrived now, bringing cold that froze water in the pump and made every outdoor task an exercise in endurance. Christmas was approaching, though out here on the ranch it didn't feel like the holidays she'd known in Boston. No decorations, no parties, no elaborate preparations. Just the same daily routine of survival. Martha saved them from complete isolation by arriving one afternoon in her sturdy wagon with Danny driving and an enormous pine tree tied to the back. "Christmas tree," she announced, stomping snow off her boots at the door. "Can't have a proper Christmas without one. Danny, get that inside and set it up near the hearth. Cora, you got any decorations or do we need to make some?" "I don't think," Cora began, but Martha waved her off. "Course you don't. You've been too busy settling in to think about holidays. That's why I'm here." She produced a basket from the wagon filled with ribbon, dried flowers, and strings of cranberries. "Come on, girl, let's make this place festive." Rhett watched this invasion with bemused tolerance, but Cora could see he was pleased. By the time Martha left at dusk, the house had been transformed. The tree stood proud near the fireplace, decorated with ribbons and cranberries and small pine cones. Holly and evergreen branches adorned the mantel. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon from the spiced cider Martha had insisted on making. "It's beautiful," Cora said softly, standing back to admire their work. "It is," Rhett agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the decorations. That night, unable to sleep, Cora sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen. She'd been thinking about Lydia, about the life she'd left behind, about the guilt that still gnawed at her edges for essentially stealing her sister's intended husband. She needed to write, to explain, to somehow make peace with what she'd done. The letter took hours to compose. She wrote and crossed out and wrote again, trying to find words that were honest without being cruel. In the end, she kept it simple. "Dear Lydia," she wrote, "I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I wanted you to know that I've settled in at the Calloway Ranch and that things are better than I expected. Mr. Calloway has been kind and fair, and I'm learning to be useful here. I don't know if you ever wonder about the life you gave up, but I want you to know I'm grateful you did. This place is hard and raw and nothing like Boston, but it feels right in a way I can't quite explain. I hope you find your own version of this someday, whatever it looks like. Your sister, Cora." She sealed the letter and set it aside to post when next they went to town. It felt like closing a chapter, like finally stepping fully out of Lydia's shadow and into her own story. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her look up. Rhett descended from the loft, dressed in his nightshirt and looking concerned. "You all right? I heard you moving around." "Couldn't sleep. Decided to write a letter home." "Everything okay back east?" "I don't know. I haven't heard from my father since I left." It didn't hurt as much as she'd expected to admit that. "I don't think I will. I wasn't the daughter he wanted to send, and I doubt he's interested in how things turned out." Rhett moved to the table and sat across from her. "His loss." "Maybe." Cora traced the grain of the wood with one finger. "Or maybe he knew all along that I needed to leave, that I'd never become who I was meant to be if I stayed in that house, in that shadow. Maybe sending me away was the kindest thing he ever did for me, even if he didn't mean it that way." "That's a generous interpretation." "I'm trying to be generous these days. Anger and resentment are exhausting to carry." She looked up at him. "Out here, everything feels simpler. Hard work, honest effort, surviving the winter. No complicated social games or worrying about what people think. Just life. Real life. It's not always this simple, Rhett warned. Summer brings its own challenges. Drought, rattlesnakes, cattle thieves. Spring means calving season, which is 24-hour vigilance for weeks. And the isolation? He paused. It gets to people, especially women who are used to company and society. I never had much of either in Boston. Cora met his gaze steadily. I'm not Lydia, Rhett. I'm not going to wilt because there aren't tea parties or ball gowns. This is where I want to be. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Good, because I don't want you to leave. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not going anywhere. We should talk about that. Rhett leaned forward, his expression serious. About what this is becoming. We agreed on partnership, but it feels like it's turning into something more. Or maybe that's just me. It's not just you. Cora's hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together to hide it. I feel it too. I didn't expect to, didn't plan on it, but it's there anyway. He reached across the table and covered her hands with his. I don't know how to do this, Cora. Romance, courtship, all those pretty words and gestures. The war burned a lot of that out of me. What I can offer is honesty and loyalty and a promise that I'll work every day to make you glad you stayed. That's more than most people get. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. More than I ever expected to have. I want to do this right, Rhett continued. Court you properly, marry you in the church, make it real instead of just a practical arrangement. You deserve that. You deserve to be chosen, not just accepted as a substitute. Tears pricked Cora's eyes. You're choosing me? I'm choosing you. He squeezed her hands gently. Every day, every moment, I'm choosing you. The woman who faces down devil roosters and doesn't panic in blizzards and makes this house feel like home. Not the photograph, not some imagined perfect bride. You, Cora Delaney. Just you. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. I choose you too. The honest, hard-working, occasionally infuriating rancher who writes beautiful letters and carries shadows from war but keeps moving forward anyway. I choose you, Rhett Calloway. He stood and moved around the table, pulling her up into his arms. The embrace was warm and solid and real, his heart beating steady against her ear. Cora wrapped her arms around his waist and let herself sink into the security of being held, being wanted, being chosen. We'll do this right, Rhett murmured into her hair. Set a wedding date, invite Martha and the neighbors, make it official. But I want you to know something, Cora. In every way that matters, you're already my wife, already my partner, already the person I want beside me for whatever comes next. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. He pulled back enough to look down at her, his gray eyes soft in the lamplight. That's when partners matter most, isn't it? When things get difficult. Cora reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of evening stubble under her fingers. Then yes, let's do this right. Let's make it real. He kissed her then, slow and gentle and full of promise. It was Cora's first real kiss, and it tasted like coffee and hope and the beginning of something true. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. We should probably get some sleep, Rhett said, though he made no move to release her. Probably. Cora smiled up at him. But I'm not tired anymore. Neither am I. They ended up sitting together by the dying fire, Cora tucked against Rhett's side with his arm around her shoulders, talking about everything and nothing. They made plans for the wedding, for the ranch, for the future they were building together. They shared stories from their childhoods, laughed at foolish memories, admitted fears they'd never voiced before. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Cora realized this was what she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Not romance or grand gestures or the kind of love poems were written about. Just this, partnership and honesty and someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. The morning light found them still sitting together, exhausted but happy, ready to face whatever the day would bring, together. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Martha took charge of arrangements with her characteristic efficiency, declaring that Powder Ridge hadn't seen a proper wedding in 3 years, and this one would be done right. The small church in town was reserved, invitations spread by word of mouth through the valley, and Martha herself insisted on making Cora's wedding dress. "I know you've got that practical brown thing you probably plan to wear," Martha said one afternoon as she pinned fabric around Cora's shoulders. "But a woman gets married once if she's lucky, and she deserves to feel beautiful doing it. Hold still." The dress was simple but lovely, cream-colored wool with lace at the collar, and cuffs that Martha had been saving for something special. Standing before the mirror in Martha's sewing room, Cora barely recognized herself. The woman looking back had color in her cheeks from Wyoming's sun and wind, confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there in Boston, and something that looked almost like happiness. "You'll do," Martha said gruffly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "That boy won't know what hit him." The wedding was set for the day after Christmas, giving them something joyful to look forward to after the holiday. Rhett had ridden to town 3 times in as many weeks, each trip taking most of a day, and came back with mysterious packages he hid in the barn. When Cora asked what he was doing, he'd simply smiled and said she'd find out soon enough. On Christmas Eve, they sat together by the decorated tree, the house warm and fragrant with the spiced cider Cora had learned to make from Martha's recipe. Rhett handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I know we said we'd wait until after the wedding for gifts," he said, suddenly looking nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "But I wanted you to have this now." Inside was a wooden box, clearly handmade, the lid carved with an intricate pattern of flowers and vines. Cora ran her fingers over the design, marveling at the detail. "You made this?" "My father was a woodworker, taught me the basics before he died. I'm rusty, but—" He shrugged. "I wanted you to have something that was just yours. Something I made with my own hands." Cora opened the box and found it lined with soft fabric. Perfect for storing precious things, letters, or jewelry, or whatever small treasures she wanted to keep safe. Her throat tightened with emotion at the thoughtfulness of it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you. I'll treasure it always." "There's something inside," Rhett said quietly. She looked again and found a folded piece of paper. When she opened it, she recognized Rhett's careful handwriting. "These are vows," he explained. "The ones I want to say to you tomorrow, but also the ones I want you to have written down so you can read them whenever you need reminding, of what you mean to me, of the promises I'm making." Cora read through tears that blurred the words but couldn't hide their meaning. He promised partnership and protection, honesty and loyalty, to choose her every day for the rest of his life. He promised to weather storms beside her, to share burdens and joys, to build a life that honored them both. It was everything she'd never dared to hope for, written in plain words that somehow carried more weight than any flowery poetry could have. "I didn't get you anything," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what you'd want, and I don't have money of my own. You gave me everything already." Rhett pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "You gave me a home instead of a house. You gave me someone to come back to. You gave me a reason to plan for more than just the next season. That's worth more than any gift I could ever buy." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the fire crackled and snow began to fall softly outside. Tomorrow they would make it official, would stand before God and community and pledge their lives to each other. But tonight, in the quiet warmth of their home, it already felt sacred. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the world sparkling with fresh snow under brilliant sunshine. Cora woke with butterflies in her stomach and excitement thrumming through her veins. This was her wedding day, the day she would become Cora Calloway, rancher's wife, partner to a man who saw her and chose her despite everything. Martha arrived mid-morning with the dress and an army of determination. She shooed Rhett out of the house with instructions not to return until it was time to leave for the church, then set about transforming Cora into a bride. "Nervous?" Martha asked as she worked on Cora's hair, pinning it up in a style more elegant than Cora had ever managed herself. "Terrified," Cora admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if he realizes he made a mistake?" "That boy looks at you like you hung the moon," Martha said firmly. "And I've known Rhett Calloway for 5 years now. He doesn't make rash decisions, and he doesn't go back on his word. If he's marrying you, It's because you're exactly what he wants. I just keep thinking about Lydia, about how she was supposed to be the one standing here, and you're just the woman who actually showed up. Martha turned Cora to face her, her expression fierce. Listen to me, girl. That sister of yours played games with a good man's heart and didn't have the courage to follow through. You had the courage. You came all this way knowing you might be rejected, knowing you weren't what he expected, and you stayed anyway. You worked. You adapted. You made yourself indispensable. That's not second choice. That's being exactly the right person at exactly the right time. The words settled something that had been restless in Cora's chest. Martha was right. She wasn't Lydia's substitute. She was her own person, bringing her own strengths, building her own relationship with Rhett. The deception that had brought her here didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what they'd built together since. When Martha finally stepped back to let Cora see herself in the mirror, Cora gasped. The woman reflected there was beautiful, not in Lydia's effortless way, but in something deeper and more real. She looked strong and capable, and genuinely happy. Her eyes bright with anticipation, her smile natural and unforced. Perfect, Martha declared. Now let's get you to that church before the groom thinks you've run off. The church was small but packed with people when they arrived. It seemed the entire valley had turned out for the wedding, ranchers and their families crowding the pews, all dressed in their best. Cora recognized faces from Martha's dinner party and the handful of times they'd been to town, felt their curiosity and approval in equal measure. Caleb stood at the front beside Rhett, grinning like this was the best day of his life. Martha took her place as matron of honor, though she'd grumbled about the title. And Rhett, standing tall in a suit that made him look both civilized and somehow more rugged, turned as Cora entered. The look on his face made every moment of doubt, every fear, every hard day worth it. He stared at her like she was a miracle, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and walking toward him. His eyes shone with emotion he didn't try to hide, and when she reached him and took his hand, she felt him trembling. "You're beautiful," he whispered, just for her. "So are you," she whispered back, and meant it. The ceremony was simple and traditional, the words familiar but weighted with new meaning. When the minister asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Cora's voice rang out clear and certain. Rhett's response was equally firm, his hand gripping hers like he'd never let go. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Rhett cupped Cora's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and when they pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. They were married. Actually, officially married. Cora Calloway. The name settled over her like a blessing. The reception was held at Martha's ranch, her large house and barn transformed into a celebration space. There was food and music and dancing, neighbors bringing dishes and well wishes, everyone determined to give the newlyweds a proper send-off. Cora found herself swept into conversation after conversation, welcomed into the community with a warmth that surprised her. "You're good for him," one rancher's wife told her. "Rhett's been alone too long. It's nice to see him smile again." "He deserves happiness," another woman added, "after everything he's been through. We're glad he found you." Found her. Not settled for her, not accepted her as a substitute. Found her, as if she'd been what he was searching for all along. Rhett stayed close throughout the evening, his hand often at the small of her back or holding hers, as if he needed the constant physical reminder that she was real and his. When someone asked how they met, he told the truth without shame. "She answered a matrimonial advertisement intended for her sister," he said simply. "Best case of mistaken identity in history." The honesty disarmed potential gossip before it could start. People laughed and toasted to happy accidents, and Cora felt the last vestiges of shame about the circumstances melt away. This was her story now, hers and Rhett's, and there was no reason to hide it. As the evening wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Rhett leaned close to Cora's ear. "What do you say we slip away? I'd like to get my wife home." My wife. The word sent warmth cascading through her. "I'd like that." They made their goodbyes, accepting hugs and handshakes and advice both solicited and otherwise. Martha pulled Cora aside one last time. "You did good today, girl. Real good. She pressed something into Cora's hand. For the house. A little something to remember this day by. It was a small wooden frame containing a pressed flower, the wildflower Rhett had left on the table weeks ago that Cora had preserved. Somehow Martha had found it and created this gift, this tangible memory of the moment Cora had realized she was falling in love. Thank you, Cora managed past the lump in her throat. For everything. For the dress, and the party, and for accepting me. Nothing to accept. You earned your place here fair and square. Martha's eyes were suspiciously bright. Now go on. Get home to your husband. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them exhausted from the day's emotions but peacefully content. Stars scattered across the black sky, and the moon painted the snow-covered valley in shades of silver. When they pulled up before the house, Rhett set the brake and turned to Cora. Before we go in, he said, I want you to know something. I meant every word I said today. Every promise. You're not just my wife in name. You're my partner, my equal, my choice. Nothing about this is obligation or making the best of circumstances. This is what I want. You are what I want. I know. Cora touched his face, cold from the night air. I feel the same way. This is where I choose to be. With you. Always. He kissed her again, tender and thorough, then climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. To Cora's surprise, he scooped her up in his arms. Traditional, he explained with a rare smile. The groom carries the bride over the threshold. I'm told it's good luck. We don't need luck, Cora said, wrapping her arms around his neck. We have each other. Even better. He carried her inside their home, kicking the door closed behind them, and Cora's last thought before he kissed her again was that she'd never felt safer or more wanted in her entire life. The next morning dawned quiet and peaceful. Cora woke wrapped in her husband's arms, warm despite the cold house, and let herself simply exist in that moment of perfect contentment. They had the rest of their lives to figure out the details. Today, she just wanted to savor being married to this complicated, wonderful man who'd chosen her. Eventually, they had to face the day. The livestock needed tending, and life on the ranch didn't pause for new marriages. But there was an easiness between them now that hadn't existed before, a comfort in casual touches and shared glances that spoke of intimacy beyond the physical. Over breakfast, Rhett laid out plans for the spring. Calving season starts in March. It'll be intense, round-the-clock work for about 6 weeks. I'll need to hire extra hands. Then in May, we do the branding and drive part of the herd to market. He paused. I'm telling you all this because you should know what you're in for. The winter's been relatively quiet, but spring and summer are when things get chaotic. I can handle chaos, Cora said confidently. Tell me what I can do to help. They spent the morning discussing the ranch operations in detail, Rhett explaining things he'd glossed over before, treating her like the true partner she now was. Cora asked questions, took mental notes, began to understand the complex web of decisions and timing that went into running a successful cattle operation. They were still talking when Caleb burst through the door, his face flushed and urgent. Boss, riders coming up the valley road. Fast. Looks like trouble. Rhett was on his feet instantly, all ease gone, replaced by the alertness of a man who'd survived war by staying vigilant. How many? 2 that I can see, but they're pushing hard. Cora followed them outside, her heart beginning to pound. Visitors were common enough, but not ones that prompted Caleb to look worried. Through the bright winter morning, she could make out 2 horses approaching at a gallop, their riders bent low over their necks. As they drew closer, Cora's breath caught. One of the riders was a woman, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. Even at this distance, Cora would recognize that hair anywhere. Lydia. Her sister had come to Wyoming. The horses thundered into the yard, both animals lathered despite the cold. The man riding with Lydia was young and well-dressed, his fine clothes and soft hands marking him as someone unused to hard travel. He dismounted first, then helped Lydia down with the exaggerated courtesy of someone trying to make an impression. Lydia turned, and Cora saw her sister clearly for the first time in 2 months. She was as beautiful as ever, perhaps more so, her face flushed from the ride, and her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or determination or both. She wore a traveling suit that had probably been elegant in Boston, but was now stained with dust and wrinkled from hard riding. "Cora," Lydia breathed. "Thank God we found you. I've come to make things right." The words hung in the frozen air. Cora felt Rhett move to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Caleb had positioned himself near the barn, watching the newcomers with the wariness of someone who sensed trouble. "What are you doing here, Lydia?" Cora's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I came to reclaim what's mine." Lydia's chin lifted, and suddenly she was the imperious sister Cora remembered, the one who'd always gotten her way through sheer force of beauty and will. "I made a terrible mistake refusing Mr. Calloway's proposal. I was frightened and foolish, and I've regretted it every day since. But I'm here now, ready to honor my commitment." She turned to Rhett, and her expression shifted into something calculated and coquettish. "Mr. Calloway, I apologize for my cowardice in sending my sister in my place. But as you can see, the error has been corrected. I'm here now, ready to be your wife as we originally agreed." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath, waiting for someone to speak. It was Rhett who broke it, his voice cold and flat in a way Cora had never heard. "You're too late. I married Cora yesterday. She's my wife now, legally and in every other way that matters." Lydia's perfect face crumpled. But you can't have. The letters, the promises, all of it was to me. I'm the one you fell in love with, not her." "I fell in love with words on paper," Rhett corrected. "Words that I now realize couldn't have been written by you. The woman I actually fell in love with is standing right here." He reached for Cora's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Your sister, my wife, the bravest, most genuine person I've ever met." "But look at her." Lydia's voice rose, desperate and ugly. "She's plain and sun-worn and nothing like what you wanted. I'm the one in the photograph. I'm the one you were expecting." "You're right," Rhett said calmly. "You're exactly what I thought I wanted. Beautiful, refined, everything the photograph promised. But you know what? That photograph was a lie. Not just because the woman in it had no intention of coming, but because it promised something shallow and ultimately worthless." He turned to look at Cora, and his expression softened. "Your sister showed up terrified and honest. She worked from dawn to dusk without complaint. She faced down blizzards and devil roosters and the isolation of ranch life without flinching. She made this house a home through sheer force of will and determination. She's everything I didn't know I needed, and I thank God every day that you were too much of a coward to get on that stage." The words landed like blows. Lydia stepped back, her face twisting with hurt and rage. "You can't mean that. You can't possibly prefer her to me." "I don't prefer her," Rhett said quietly. "I choose her. There's a difference. Preference is about comparison, about what's better. Choice is about what's right. And Cora is the right woman for me, for this life, for everything I want to build. You never were. You never could have been." The young man who'd arrived with Lydia cleared his throat awkwardly. "Lydia, darling, perhaps we should—" "Shut up, Frederick," Lydia snapped, then seemed to realize what she'd said. Her hand flew to her mouth. "I didn't mean— Frederick, I'm sorry, I just—" "Frederick?" Cora's eyebrows rose. "You brought someone with you." "He's—" Lydia's face flushed crimson. "He's my fiancé. We're engaged. Frederick Pemberton III of the Boston Pembertons. He proposed 3 weeks ago." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. This whole dramatic journey, this claim to want to honor her commitment, had been a lie. Or if not a complete lie, then motivated by something far more complicated than genuine regret. "So let me understand this," Rhett said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You got engaged to another man, then decided to travel across the country to reclaim me. Why? Did your Boston gentleman not live up to expectations? Or did you just decide you couldn't stand the thought of your sister having something you'd thrown away?" Lydia's jaw worked, but no words came out. The truth was written plain on her face, in the guilty flush and the way her eyes skittered away from Cora's. "That's what I thought." Rhett's disgust was palpable. "You didn't want me. You wanted to make sure Cora didn't have me. You wanted to keep her in your shadow where you're comfortable with her being. That's not true." But even Lydia's protest sounded hollow. "It is true," Cora said quietly, finding her voice at last. She stepped forward, releasing Rhett's hand but drawing strength from his presence. It's always been true, Lydia. You never wanted me to have anything that was mine, any happiness that didn't revolve around serving your needs. When Father sent me here, you probably expected me to fail, to be sent back in shame, but I didn't fail. I succeeded. I built something real and true, and you can't stand it. Cora, I'm not finished, Cora's voice hardened. I spent 24 years making myself small so you could shine brighter. I apologized for existing, for taking up space, for daring to want anything of my own. But I'm done with that. I'm done with you using me as a mirror to make yourself look better. I have a husband now, a home, a life, and none of it is yours. None of it ever will be. Tears streamed down Lydia's perfect face, but for once Cora felt no sympathy. This was pain of Lydia's own making, consequences of her own choices. You need to leave, Rhett said firmly. Ride back to town, take the next stage east, and go home to your fiancé. Build your own life instead of trying to destroy ours. But Lydia looked around desperately, as if searching for an ally. Frederick was examining his fingernails with exaggerated interest. Caleb was still watching from the barn, his expression clearly showing whose side he was on. There was no help coming. Please, Lydia tried one more time, her voice breaking. Cora, you can't want this. You can't possibly be happy here in this wilderness with this rough man who— I love him, Cora interrupted. I love this life. I love who I am here. And I'm not going anywhere. The finality in her voice seemed to finally penetrate. Lydia's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, she whispered. Fine. You can have your rough rancher and your provincial life, but don't come crying to me when you realize what you've given up. The only thing I've given up is you, Cora said, and that's no loss at all. Lydia flinched as if struck. Then she turned to Frederick, who hurried to help her remount. Before they rode away, she looked back one last time, and Cora saw something in her sister's expression that might have been regret, or might have been the first glimmer of understanding that actions had consequences. Then they were gone, galloping back down the valley road, leaving only hoof prints in the snow and a strange, hollow feeling in Cora's chest. Rhett's arms came around her from behind, solid and warm and real. You all right? I think so. Cora leaned back against him, watching until Lydia was nothing but a speck in the distance. It's strange. Part of me thought I'd feel guilty or sad, but mostly I just feel free. She had no right to come here, no right to try to claim something she threw away. I know, but in a way I'm glad she came. Cora turned in his arms to face him, because now there's no doubt, no lingering questions about what might have happened if she'd shown up earlier. You chose me, Rhett Calloway. Not because I was convenient or available or the only option. You chose me over her, clearly and publicly. That means everything. I'd choose you 1,000 times over, Rhett said fiercely. In any scenario, in any universe, I'd choose you. You're my wife, my partner, my home. Nothing your sister says or does will ever change that. Cora kissed him then, pouring all her relief and love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was politely studying the sky and whistling tunelessly. Crisis averted? The young ranch hand called. Crisis averted, Rhett confirmed. He kept one arm around Cora's waist as they walked toward the barn. Though I expect the valley will be talking about this for months. Let them talk, Cora said firmly. We know the truth. That's all that matters. And it was true. As they returned to the familiar routine of ranch work, as life settled back into its normal rhythm, Cora felt something settle in her chest that had been restless and uncertain since Boston. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, building exactly the life she wanted. Lydia's visit hadn't shaken her foundation. If anything, it had proven how solid that foundation truly was. Winter deepened after Lydia's departure, bringing cold that made the previous week seem mild by comparison. The valley froze solid, the river becoming a ribbon of ice, and some mornings the temperature dropped so low that water left in buckets overnight turned to solid blocks. But inside the Calloway house, warmth radiated from more than just the fireplace. Cora and Rhett settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The awkwardness that might have existed between newlyweds was absent, replaced by the partnership they'd been building since her arrival. They worked together, ate together, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Rhett taught her to read the weather signs, to recognize when a storm was coming hours before it hit. Cora taught him to cook more than basic survival food, to appreciate the difference between a meal made with care and one thrown together out of necessity. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. The way Rhett would brush snow from her shoulders when she came in from gathering eggs. The way Cora would have hot coffee waiting when he returned from checking livestock in the freezing pre-dawn darkness. The way they'd sit together in the evening, her mending while he carved small wooden animals that accumulated on the mantel, both of them content in comfortable silence. 3 weeks after Lydia's visit, a letter arrived from Boston. Cora recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope and felt her stomach clench. She'd written to him about the marriage, but hadn't expected a response. Thomas Delaney had never been one for sentiment. Rhett found her staring at the unopened letter at the kitchen table. "Bad news?" "I don't know yet." Cora turned the envelope over in her hands. "It's from my father. I'm afraid to read it." "Want me to leave you alone?" "No, stay." She took a breath and broke the seal. The letter was brief, written in her father's characteristic terse style. "Cora," it began, "your letter regarding your marriage to Mr. Calloway has been received. I am pleased to hear you have settled satisfactorily. Lydia returned home 3 weeks ago with her intended Mr. Frederick Pemberton. The wedding is planned for spring. She has shared with me the circumstances of her visit to Wyoming. I will not apologize for sending you west, as it appears to have been the correct decision for all involved. However, I acknowledge that I failed to see your strengths while you lived under my roof. Your mother would be proud of the woman you have become. Enclosed, please find the portion of her jewelry that would have been your dowry. You have earned it. Thomas Delaney." Cora read the letter twice, then a third time, hardly believing the words. An acknowledgement from her father, even a grudging one, was more than she'd ever expected. And her mother's jewelry, the pearls and small sapphires that had been in the family for generations, meant more to her than any amount of money could have. "Good news or bad?" Rhett asked gently. "Strange news." Cora handed him the letter. "My father being almost kind. I don't quite know what to make of it." Rhett read quickly, then looked up with a slight smile. "Sounds like he's admitting he was wrong about you. That takes courage for a man like that." "He's not apologizing," Cora pointed out, "just acknowledging facts. For some men, that's as close to an apology as they can manage." Rhett pulled out the small velvet pouch that had been tucked in the envelope and handed it to Cora. "These should be with you. They're part of your mother's legacy." Cora opened the pouch and poured the jewelry into her palm. The pearls glowed softly in the lamplight, the sapphires catching the glow like captured stars. She remembered her mother wearing these pieces, remembered the way they'd seemed to light up her gentle face. "They're beautiful," Rhett said, "though not as beautiful as the woman holding them." Cora laughed, the sound watery with unshed tears. "That's terrible flattery." "It's honest flattery. There's a difference." He pulled her close, and she tucked her head under his chin, the jewelry still clutched in her hand. "Are you all right? Really?" "I think so. It's just, I spent so many years invisible to him, and now, when I'm thousands of miles away, he finally sees me. It's strange and sad and somehow fitting all at once." "You were never invisible," Rhett said firmly. "He just wasn't looking properly. His loss has been my gain." The simple words settled something in Cora's chest that had been tight since childhood. She was seen now, valued, chosen, not by her father perhaps, but by the man who mattered most. February arrived with a brief warm spell that melted some of the snow and turned the roads to sucking mud. Cora was in the kitchen making bread when Martha arrived unannounced, her wagon splashing through the mire with her usual disregard for obstacles. "Got news," Martha announced without preamble. "Just came from town. The Hendersons are selling their ranch, moving back east to be near their daughter." Rhett looked up from the tack he was mending. "The whole operation?" "Everything. 3,000 acres adjoining your north boundary, the house, the outbuildings, 200 head of cattle. They're asking a fair price, considering." Martha fixed him with a meaningful look. You should think about it. That land would double your grazing capacity. After Martha left, Cora found Rhett staring out the window toward the north, his expression distant and calculating. You're considering it, she said. It's a good opportunity. That land connects to the best summer grazing in the valley. With both properties, I could run 1,000 head easily, maybe more. He paused. But it would mean taking on debt, risk, and it would be a lot more work, especially during calving and roundup seasons. What do you want to do? I want to talk to my partner about it. Rhett turned to face her. This isn't just my decision anymore, Cora. If we buy that ranch, it affects both of us. More work, more worry, more risk if things go wrong, but also more potential, more future for any... He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. Any children we might have? Cora finished gently. They hadn't talked directly about that possibility yet, though it hovered unspoken between them. Yeah, that... Rhett rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. I know we haven't discussed it, but I assume at some point... I want children, Cora said firmly. Someday, when we're ready, and I want them to inherit something worth having. So if you think buying the Henderson Ranch is the right move, then we should do it. Even if it means harder work, longer days, less security in the short term? We've already survived blizzards and sick cattle and my dramatic sister showing up unannounced. I think we can handle expansion. She crossed to him and took his hands. I trust you, Rhett. I trust your judgment about the ranch, and I trust us to face whatever comes together. The decision was made. Over the next weeks, Rhett negotiated with the Hendersons, secured a loan from the bank in Cheyenne, and finalized the purchase. By the time the snow began to melt in earnest and the first hints of spring appeared, the Callaway Ranch had doubled in size. March brought calving season, and with it the relentless work Rhett had warned about. Cows gave birth at all hours, many needing assistance to survive. Rhett and Caleb spent nights in the barn, monitoring the pregnant heifers, pulling calves when necessary, bottle feeding the ones whose mothers rejected them or died in labor. Cora did what she could to help. She kept food ready at all hours, coffee constantly brewing, clean clothes available when theirs became too filthy to function in. She learned to bottle feed the orphaned calves, marveling at their strength and determination to survive despite their rough start. She kept the house running so Rhett and Caleb could focus entirely on the livestock. It was exhausting, relentless work that tested them all. But there was something deeply satisfying about it too. Watching the herd grow, seeing the new calves stagger to their feet and take their first wobbly steps, knowing they were building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. One night, 3 weeks into calving season, Rhett stumbled into the house well past midnight, covered in blood and mud and other things Cora didn't want to identify. He looked dead on his feet, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Lost one, he said flatly. Heifer and her calf both. Got there too late. Cora's heart ached for him. She'd learned enough about ranching to know that losses were inevitable, but that didn't make them easier to bear. You did everything you could. Wasn't enough. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Should have checked on her earlier. Should have noticed the signs. You can't be everywhere at once. Cora knelt before him, taking his filthy hands in hers. You're one man, Rhett. One very tired man who's been working himself to the bone for 3 weeks straight. You're allowed to be human. Can't afford to be human. Not during calving season. One mistake costs lives and money we can't spare, especially with the new loan payment coming due. She could see the weight of responsibility crushing him. The war-taught conviction that he had to be perfect or people would die. Listen to me, she said firmly. You saved 23 calves in the last 3 weeks. 23 lives that exist because of your skill and dedication. Yes, you lost one. It's sad and it's hard, but it doesn't erase all the good you've done. You're not a soldier anymore, Rhett. You don't have to carry everyone's survival on your shoulders alone. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked. I don't know how to not carry it. Then let me help carry some of it. Cora stood and pulled him to his feet. Come on, you're going to wash up and eat something and sleep for at least 4 hours. Caleb can handle things in the barn for 1 night. Cora, that's an order from your partner. She softened her tone. Please, Rhett. You're no good to the ranch if you collapse from exhaustion. And you're no good to me either. I need you healthy and whole, Not working yourself to death trying to achieve impossible perfection. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 4 hours. 6 would be better. 4 is what I can spare. It was a compromise, and Cora took it. She heated water for washing, made him eat a full meal despite his protests that he wasn't hungry, and essentially bullied him into bed. Then she went out to the barn herself, found Caleb dozing in the hay, and told him to wake her if anything urgent happened. "You sure, Mrs. Calloway?" Caleb looked doubtful. "The boss won't like you being out here." "The boss needs sleep more than he needs to micromanage everything. I can check on cows as well as anyone." She pulled on the oversized work coat Rhett had left hanging by the barn door. "Wake me if you need me." She returned to the house to find Rhett already asleep, sprawled across their bed, still partially dressed. Cora removed his boots and covered him with a quilt, then settled into the rocking chair to keep watch. If he woke before 4 hours were up, she'd send him right back to bed. He needed rest whether he admitted it or not. As it turned out, Rhett slept for 5 hours straight, waking with a start and immediately trying to bolt for the barn. Cora intercepted him at the door. "Caleb has everything under control. 2 more calves born, both healthy, mother's doing fine. He came to check with me an hour ago." Rhett blinked, processing this information. "You've been coordinating with Caleb?" "I'm not completely useless around livestock, you know. I've been paying attention these last weeks." She handed him a cup of coffee. "Drink this. Eat breakfast. Then you can go back to work." Something shifted in his expression, a combination of gratitude and love and wonder. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You chose me," Cora said simply. "Every day you choose me. That's more than enough." Calving season finally ended in early April, leaving them all exhausted but triumphant. They'd saved 93% of the calves, a success rate that had Martha nodding approval and the other ranchers congratulating Rhett on his skill. The expanded herd meant they'd have plenty to take to market in the summer, enough to make the loan payment and still have profit left over. But the reprieve was brief. April brought its own challenges. A late spring storm killed several calves that had been born healthy but couldn't survive the sudden cold snap. One of the older cows developed an infection that spread through part of the herd despite their best efforts to quarantine. And the creek that fed their main water source began running low, a worrying sign this early in the season. "Drought," Rhett said grimly, staring at the sluggish water. "If we don't get rain soon, we'll be in real trouble by summer." May arrived hot and dry, the grass browning weeks earlier than normal. Other ranchers in the valley began expressing concerns about water and forage. At Martha's suggestion, they called a meeting to discuss collective action, pooling resources to dig deeper wells and plan for worst-case scenarios. It was at this meeting that Cora first heard the whispers. She'd accompanied Rhett to town for the gathering, and while the men talked strategy in the church hall, the wives congregated outside. Most were friendly, welcoming Cora into their discussions about gardens and preserving and the challenges of ranch life. But a few stood apart, and their voices carried further than they probably intended. "Mail order bride," one woman said, her tone dripping disdain, "and not even the right one. She tricked him, from what I heard." "Poor Mr. Calloway," another agreed, "expecting a beauty and getting that plain thing instead, though I suppose she's sturdy enough for ranch work. I heard the real bride came back to claim him and he sent her away, probably too embarrassed to admit he'd made a mistake." The words shouldn't have hurt. Cora had dealt with worse in Boston, had learned to let cruel comments slide off her like water. But something about hearing herself discussed as if she were livestock, as if her worth was measured only in utility and deception, made her blood boil. She was turning to confront them when Martha appeared at her elbow, face like thunder. "You got something to say about my friend's marriage?" Martha's voice could have cut glass. "Say it to her face. Or better yet, say it to Rhett Calloway's face, and see how that works out for you." The women flushed and stammered, but Martha wasn't done. "Cora Calloway has more strength and character in her little finger than the 3 of you combined. She works harder, complains less, and has made more of a success of ranch life in 4 months than most of you have in years. So you can take your gossip and your judgments and choke on them." The women scattered like startled chickens. Cora stood frozen, torn between gratitude and mortification. "Martha, you didn't have to, "Yes, I did." Small-minded fools who've got nothing better to do than tear down others make me sick. Martha's expression softened slightly. Don't let them get to you, girl. They're just jealous. Jealous of what? I'm nothing special. You're special to Rhett, and that's what matters. Half these women have been trying to catch his attention for years. Seeing him happily married to someone they consider beneath them sticks in their craw. Martha squeezed Cora's shoulder. Hold your head high. You earned your place here. When the meeting ended and Rhett came to find her, Cora was still shaken but determined not to show it. They rode home in the wagon as the sun set, painting the dry valley in shades of gold and amber. Rhett was quiet, processing whatever had been discussed in the meeting, and Cora was content to let the silence stretch. Halfway home, he spoke. I heard what those women said to you, or rather, what they said about you. Cora's stomach dropped. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. His hands tightened on the reins. Tomorrow, I'm going back to town to speak with their husbands. Make it clear that disrespecting my wife means they don't get help during the drought. They don't get access to our wells if theirs run dry. They don't get anything from me or mine. Rhett, no, that's too harsh. Is it? He looked at her, his gray eyes hard. They called you a trick, a mistake, plain and worthless except for work. They suggested I was too embarrassed to admit I'd been deceived. That's not just gossip, Cora. That's calculated cruelty designed to hurt you and undermine our marriage. I know what it was. Cora touched his arm. But punishing their families for the wives' nastiness isn't right. We're better than that. I don't feel like being better. I feel like defending what's mine. I'm not yours to defend like property. Her voice sharpened. I'm your partner, remember? And as your partner, I'm telling you that retaliation will only make things worse. It'll confirm what they're saying, that I'm trouble, that marrying me was a mistake that's causing problems. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made, and I will not stand by while people disrespect you. Then don't stand by. Stand beside me. Cora met his fierce gaze with calm determination. We prove them wrong not by punishing them, but by being exactly who we are. Partners. Equals. People who face challenges together and come out stronger. That's more powerful than any threat or retaliation could ever be. He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with the war-born instinct to strike back against any threat. Finally, he exhaled slowly and nodded. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I hate that you're right, but you are. I know it's hard, but we win by living well, not by making enemies. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. She leaned against his shoulder. Besides, Martha already handled it. She eviscerated them in front of half the women in the valley. I don't think they'll be spreading gossip about me again anytime soon. Rhett laughed, the tension draining from his shoulders. I bet she did. Martha Boone doesn't believe in subtle corrections. They continued home as darkness fell, the dry wind rustling through brown grass that should have been green. The drought was real and getting worse, but they would face it together, the way they faced everything, as partners. June brought crisis in earnest. The creek stopped flowing entirely, reduced to a series of stagnant pools. The grass turned brittle and brown, crunching underfoot. Cattle began losing weight despite the supplemental feed Rhett was buying at prices that made him wince. Other ranchers in the valley faced the same problems, and tensions rose as water sources became contested territory. One scorching afternoon, Cora was in the kitchen garden trying to save what plants she could with carefully rationed water when she heard shouting from the north pasture. She dropped the bucket and ran, her heart pounding with undefined dread. She found Rhett and Caleb at the fence line where the Henderson property connected to theirs, facing 3 men on horseback. One was a rancher named Sloan, who she'd met briefly in town, a hard-faced man with a reputation for sharp dealing. The other 2 looked like hired guns, men whose hands rested too easily on the weapons at their hips. I'm telling you, Calloway, that creek flows through my land first. I've got the right to dam it if I want. That creek's been open water since settlement. Everyone in the valley depends on it. Rhett's voice was dangerously calm. You dam it. You kill every herd downstream. Not my problem. You should have bought land with better water access. Sloan spat into the dust. I'm filing a claim with the territorial office. That water's mine to use as I see fit. You do that, and there'll be consequences, Rhett said quietly. That a threat? One of the hired men shifted in his saddle, his hand dropping to his gun belt. It's a promise. Rhett's stance hadn't changed, but Cora recognized the coiled tension in him, the way he'd been before the war when he'd been trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. Touch that creek, Sloan, and you'll find out what this valley does to men who put profit over community. Big words from a man who married himself a liar. Sloan's sneer was ugly. Heard all about your mail order mix-up. Maybe you should focus on keeping your house in order before making threats. The words were calculated to wound, to undermine. Cora saw Rhett's hands clench into fists and knew he was seconds from doing something they'd all regret. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. Mr. Sloan, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the dusty space between them. You're absolutely right. My arrival here was based on deception. My sister was supposed to come, and I came instead. But you know what? That deception brought me to the right place at the right time. It brought me to a man who values honor and community over personal gain. A man who thinks about the welfare of his neighbors, not just his own bank account. She moved to stand beside Rhett, her hand finding his and holding tight. So yes, our beginning was complicated, but what we've built since is honest and true and based on partnership. Can you say the same about your dealings, Mr. Sloan? Can you stand before this valley and claim you've always put community first? Sloan's face darkened with rage, but before he could respond, more riders appeared. Martha Boone led them, a half-dozen ranchers from throughout the valley, all armed and all looking grimly determined. Heard you were thinking about damming the creek, Sloan, Martha said flatly. Thought we'd come by and explain why that's a terrible idea. This is my land, and that's communal water, has been for 30 years. You try to dam it, you'll find yourself facing legal action, social ostracism, and a valley full of people who suddenly can't remember how to be neighborly. Martha's expression could have frozen fire. Your choice. But choose carefully. Because once you cross this line, there's no coming back. The standoff lasted several more tense minutes. Finally, Sloan spat again and wheeled his horse around. This isn't over, Calloway. Yes, it is, Martha called after him. You just don't know it yet. As Sloan and his men rode off, the gathered ranchers surrounded Rhett and Cora, offering support and solidarity. It was a tangible demonstration of community, of the web of relationships they'd built through honest work and fair dealing. Thank you, Rhett said to Martha. How did you know to come? Caleb rode to my place when he saw Sloan heading this way. Figured you might need backup. She looked at Cora. Nice speech, by the way. Shut him up real good. Cora's legs were shaking with delayed reaction, but she managed to smile. Someone needed to say it. That someone was you. Own it. Martha's gruff approval warmed something in Cora's chest. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the dry wind rattle the windows, Rhett pulled Cora close. You were incredible today. I was terrified. Doesn't make it less incredible. You stood up for us, for what we've built. You claimed your place here. He kissed her forehead. I'm proud to be your husband, Cora Calloway. Even though I'm the wrong mail-order bride, especially because you're the right wife. He tightened his arms around her. I love you. I should have said it before now, but I'm saying it clear. I love you. Not for what you do or how you help around the ranch, but for who you are. For your strength and honesty and the way you make everything better just by being in it. Cora's throat closed with emotion. I love you too. So much it terrifies me sometimes. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good. The kind that means I finally have something worth losing. She turned in his arms to face him. Which means we need to fight for it. Fight for this life, this ranch, this community. Together. Always together, Rhett agreed, no matter what comes. July brought the rain they'd been praying for, great thundering storms that turned the dust to mud and filled the creeks to overflowing. The grass greened up almost overnight, and the cattle began to regain their lost weight. By August, the drought was just a memory, though its lessons about community and priorities remained. Sloan sold his ranch and left the valley shortly after the rains came, unable to face the social isolation his attempted water grab had earned him. The Henderson property thrived under Callaway management, and the expanded operation provided employment for 2 more ranch hands in addition to Caleb. In September, Cora realized she'd missed her monthly courses for the second time. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. But when the nausea started and her breasts became tender, she could no longer deny the truth. She told Rhett one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I'm pregnant. At least, I'm fairly certain I am. It's early yet, but the signs are all there." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into a smile of such pure joy that Cora's eyes filled with tears. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like she'd never heard him laugh, all his usual reserve stripped away by happiness. "We're having a baby," he said wonderingly. "A real baby. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy?" He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "Cora, I don't have words. Yes, I'm happy, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful, and a dozen other things I can't name. We're going to be parents. Good parents, I hope. The best parents, because we're partners, remember? We'll figure it out together." He pulled her close, one hand already moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. Together. The pregnancy was announced to the Valley at Sunday service, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Women who'd gossiped about Cora months earlier now offered advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Men congratulated Rhett with knowing grins and warnings about sleepless nights. Martha cried actual tears and immediately began knitting a blanket. Winter came again, gentler than the year before, and Cora's belly swelled with new life. She worked as long as she could, stubbornly refusing to be coddled despite Rhett's increasing worry. By February, though, she had to concede that climbing ladders and hauling water was probably unwise. "I hate being useless," she complained one evening, watching Rhett do chores she'd always handled. "You're growing a human being. That's the opposite of useless." He kissed the top of her head as he passed. "Rest. It's what you need." The baby was born in late March, arriving with the first crocuses and the sound of calving cows in the distance. It was a long labor, made bearable by Rhett's steady presence and Martha's experienced hands. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Cora's arms, she looked down at her daughter and felt something in her chest expand beyond description. "She's perfect," Rhett whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect." They named her Eleanor Rose after both their mothers, Ellie for short. She had Rhett's gray eyes and Cora's determined chin, and from her first day she made it clear she had opinions about everything. Caring for an infant while running a ranch proved every bit as challenging as promised. There were sleepless nights and endless worries, moments of doubt and exhaustion that made Cora wonder if she was capable of being a good mother. But there were also moments of piercing joy, of watching Rhett cradle their daughter with infinite gentleness, of seeing this tiny person who was half her and half him growing stronger every day. One evening in May, when Ellie was 2 months old and finally sleeping for more than 3 hours at a stretch, Cora stood at the window watching Rhett work with the horses in the corral. The sunset painted everything gold, and the valley was green and lush from spring rains. Behind her, their daughter slept peacefully in the cradle Rhett had carved with his own hands. Around her, the house hummed with the life they'd built together. A year and a half ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach terrified and dishonest, expecting rejection and shame. Instead, she'd found partnership and love and a life she wouldn't trade for anything the world could offer. The door opened and Rhett entered, dusty and tired but smiling when he saw her at the window. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is." She turned to face him. "If you could go back to the day I arrived, knowing everything you know now, would you still choose me?" "Every single time." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, swaying gently in the fading light. "In every version of this story, in every possible universe, I would choose you. You're not the substitute, Cora. You're not second best or the one I settled for. You're the one I was meant to find, even if the path there was complicated." "I love you," Cora said simply. "I love this life. I love who I am here with you." "I love you too, always and forever." From the cradle, Ellie made a small sound in her sleep, and they both turned to look at their daughter, their future, their hope, the living proof that sometimes the wrong choice leads to exactly the right place. Outside, the Wyoming sky stretched vast and endless, full of stars and possibilities. Inside the Calloway house, a family had been born from deception and grown into truth. Cora had traveled west expecting to fix her sister's mistake and found instead her own destiny. She'd been sent as a substitute and become irreplaceable. She'd arrived as the unchosen sister and become the forever chosen wife. Some stories, she thought, as Rhett's arms tightened around her, don't begin with once upon a time. Some begin with a lie that transforms into the deepest truth. Some begin with fear and end with courage. Some begin with two people who needed each other without knowing it, and end with a love that would last through drought and storm, through doubt and hardship, through every challenge that the vast Wyoming wilderness could throw at them. This was her story now. Not Lydia's cast-off, not her father's disappointment, not the practical sister who existed in someone else's shadow. She was Cora Calloway, rancher's wife, mother, partner to a man who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And under the endless western sky, in a log house built by determined hands, that was more than enough. It was everything. It was home.